Chapter 1032. Not to mention what Bai Xinyan's body movements represented. In Smith's eyes, the young man's cold expression was the same as always. He didn't respond at all. As for Bai Xinyan, she wasn't angry or embarrassed. At least on the surface, she still maintained her posture. She quickly found a relatively suitable position. She was like a private tour guide who took the initiative to stick to him. She gestured with her hand, seemingly introducing the situation in the exhibition hall to the young man. Smith was a bit confused. Who's that? No matter how well-informed a person was, their knowledge of a completely different field was limited. In the end, it was Yuqi who exchanged information with him. This person is called Luo Nan. In Xia City, he's very. After hesitating for a moment, Yuqi used an inappropriate word. Very prestigious. Why haven't I heard of him? He doesn't belong to the circle of normal people. Yuqi could only say this. He belonged to the circle of outsiders. At most, he heard some indistinct information that was hard to distinguish between true and false. He had a bit of a vague impression. Smith could understand that there was also such a circle in the new continent. In recent years, it had become relatively flamboyant. But overall, it was still hard to understand. It was still very difficult for a person of his level to understand it in depth. He quickly grasped another important point. You guys know each other? We met once. Yuqi's response was a bit weak. Actually, it was his troublesome son who recklessly offended Luo Nan. Fortunately, his daughter handled things appropriately. Through subsequent contact, Luo Nan had more or less corrected his impression of Luo Nan. Yuqi wasn't sure if this impression was good or bad. Luo Nan had given him 2 light pats on the shoulder not too long ago in the long hallway, giving Yuqi more psychological comfort. Let's go say hello. As a broker, Smith absolutely wouldn't let go of any opportunity to expand his social network. Yuqi hesitated for a moment. He didn't refuse. Ever since he came to Area C12, he had encountered all sorts of unforeseen circumstances. He needed to find a more stable anchor point. However, accidents would always happen inadvertently. They had just taken a few steps forward when their wristbands vibrated at the same time. Yuqi saw the caller, and his heart tightened. Old Lu, what? What does deep detection mean? Don't agree. Don't pay attention to it. Wait for me. On the other side, Smith's expression also sank. Mr. Summit, isn't this notice a little too sudden? I was with Professor Bai Xinyan just now, and she didn't mention anything about the group adjustment at all. Huh. What about the 6 people from Team A and Team B? Did something happen just like that? Very likely. To hell with this reason. At this point, the 2 of them looked at each other in unison. They could not see any good news in each other's eyes. Things were really troublesome. Let's go, Smith shouted. Before he could react, Yuqi had already turned around and left quickly. Soon he was in a jogging state. In the current hall, there were only 2 or 3 non-important people who left in a hurry. It was impossible for them to attract too much attention. Luo Nan shot a glance in that direction, but he soon placed his attention back on the woman who was holding his arm. The greetings had been exchanged, but that didn't mean that he had accepted her. Luo Nan and Bai Xinyan were basically in a state of enmity ever since the 2000th young miss incident. If Bai Xinyan hadn't cooperated with him a few times, intentionally or unintentionally, and covered for him a few times, the 2 barely managed to form a tacit understanding. Luo Nan wasn't sure what Bai Xinyan would have done when their bodies touched. However, he also suspected that Bai Xinyan had guessed his current attitude. That was why she had appeared here in broad daylight. Otherwise, she would have been like the 2000s incident. She would have run away without a trace. This could be considered confidence. Was she holding on to Luo Nan's confidence? Your courage is commendable. Luo Nan gave a word of praise, expressing his appreciation for Bai Xinyan's actions. But he had no intention of introducing her to the other 3. The problem was that there was no need for him to introduce her. Blood Demon whistled. Oh my, isn't this the black-hearted beauty who tricked Jin Tong to death? Bai Xinyan bowed slightly. Mr. Blood Demon must be joking. In the next moment, she took the initiative to speak to Wan Luhua. Instructor Wan, the first quarter subsidy allocation will be transferred to you in about a week. I'll have to trouble you to take care of it. Wan Luhua had clearly dealt with Bai Xinyan more than once. Your turnover is getting more and more procrastinating. After all, this is the first wave of burners retiring from the army. The unexpected product changes have caused a large discrepancy with the budget. Plus, there are quite a few independent directors. Their heads are in a terrible mess due to the production line switching. It's hard to avoid a bit of fuss. Even Tucker and Bai Xinyan exchanged glances as they spoke. Luo Nan was a bit surprised. He didn't expect that Bai Xinyan was really famous in the inner world. All right, her connections in the inner world were much deeper than Luo Nan's at first glance. This indirectly proved one thing. The power behind Bai Xinyan was quite impressive. At the very least, it was on the level of being acknowledged by extraordinaries like Blood Demon and Wan Luhua. From his point of view, she had her value. The reason why Luo Nan was able to face Bai Xinyan with relative calmness wasn't simply because of Mr. Bai. Rather, this was a tool. If others could use him, then he should be able to play a hand or two. He should be able to make something valuable out of it. He hoped that Bai Xinyan was aware of this. He wasn't in a hurry to converse with Bai Xinyan. He didn't pay attention to what this woman was thinking. He just followed his own pace, observing today's main venue from every angle and every level. He had to investigate if there was something odd. He had to ask if he didn't understand. As long as he could get an accurate answer, it didn't matter who answered. From this point of view, Bai Xinyan could be considered an excellent guide. She giggled as she explained the layout of the entire sea area to Luo Nan. She also explained the main contents of the 4 exhibition areas. Within the venue, there's an exhibition area for natural materials for various rare mutants. There is an exhibition area for equipment that can be used for the processing and manufacturing of related materials. There is an exhibition area for the application of cutting-edge technology in related fields. There is also an exhibition area for auction items with relatively high collection values. A sparrow may be small, but it has all 5 organs. Basically, since the era of mutants, traces can be found within everything related to mutants. This is precisely the theme of this year's Jadeite Light Trade Fair. All 5 organs? Isn't it just 4 organs? Blood Demon was all smiles as he teased Bai Xinyan. If you say it like this, then there really is. Bai Xinyan didn't have time to respond before Luo Nan spoke first. There are quite a few people here. Chapter 1033. Blood Demon displayed his ability as a supporting character. What do you mean? Only humans can recognize things like distortion. Only then can there be so-called collections, processing, and cutting-edge concepts. Only when applied to humans does it have real meaning. You can say that. Luo Nan's gaze swept across the groups of people in the exhibition hall. Many people had been studying the ship with curiosity and scrutiny even earlier. Luo Nan was disinclined to pay attention to them. He just said, "The ship is a bit empty right now. It shouldn't be enough to cover the relevant fields. We'll increase." Empty? Blood Demon looked around. There were only 6 hours left until the auction at 8 o'clock in the evening. Some important auction items had already been arranged, and people began to fill the exhibition hall. Even if it wasn't to the point of being overflowing with people, it couldn't be associated with the word empty. Right now, the Jade Light has a total of 4,821 people, including the crew. I've checked the data. This cruise ship can carry over 15,000 people at full capacity. That's not even a third of it. Okay, it really is quite empty. Blood Demon shrugged. This is the data from Wang Yu's 30th birthday carnival a few years ago. The number of people on the ship exceeded 10,000. This is the first and only time. Bai Xinyan was still holding on a Luo Nan's arm. She spoke the name of her rumored boyfriend in a calm and natural manner. This is a private cruise ship, and it's specially prepared for large-scale luxury parties. It's basically not used for business purposes. Of course, the more space is wasted, the better. Almost 5,000 people is quite a lot. Plus, there will be some important people and their attendance coming later. If I had to make an estimate, it would be around 6,000 people. Really? Luo Nan didn't continue on this topic. He looked straight at Bai Xinyan for the first time. You know who I'm coming for. Bai Xinyan pointed her arm forward. The collection auction item area is this way. The venue has already been set up. Someone who didn't know better would think that Luo Nan was the owner behind the scenes of this auction. Blood Demon immediately gave him a thumbs up, but Luo Nin clearly wasn't in the mood to joke around. He just stared at Bai Xinyan until Bai Xinyan nodded. It was set up not long ago. Some of the installations need to be debugged. After all, this is the largest of all the auction items. Once it's installed, it won't move again until the auction ends. Bai Xinyan also looked like she was reporting work. For the sake of convenience, the entire booth is placed on the elevator. This is to facilitate the flow of the auction. Luo Nan and the others entered a relatively spacious area under Bai Xinyan's guidance as they spoke. The so-called spaciousness was only relative. There were actually quite a lot of people here, but compared to other areas, it seemed like there were more people working here. They were scattered in this nearly 200 square meters area, surrounding the central booth for various configurations. Luo Nan's eyes swept all around him. Rather than calling these people equipment debugging personnel, it would be better to call them lighting engineers and the like. The work under his hands consisted of light stands, projectors, AR equipment. At the back of the booth, there was an obvious holographic projection space, as well as auxiliary equipment. What a mess. This was what Luo Nan thought, and this was what he said. Are they trying to enhance the visual effect? Blood Demon returned to the scene for the first time and asked with great interest. That's right. Bai Xinyan's answer was frank and direct. The relevant equipment is too specialized, and it's hard to reproduce the research object. Plus, they've been left unused for many years. They're far too old, and their appearance and selling points aren't particularly outstanding. So they need to be packaged. At the very least, we need to let people know what these equipment are used for. Luo Nan concluded in a timely manner. His tone sounded calmer and calmer. At the same time, he stepped forward, bypassing the rather messy visual equipment, and climbed up the booth. The entire booth was shaped like a long arc. Luo Nan, who had once been to the 70 format laboratory, could tell with a single glance that the booth's flat body was an imitation of the laboratory's main layout. However, the two wings were spread out a bit more. This was most likely for the sake of carrying out a symbolic restoration of the colliserate corridors on both sides. The problem was that the originally picturesque, crab-like layout of the laboratory had become a nondescript small semicircle due to the limitations of the spatial layout. There were 6 or 7 people pacing back and forth on the booth right now. Most of them were separated by a safe distance, carefully observing the equipment that had already been installed. Some of them were even taking pictures and videos. There were also people whispering amongst themselves. They seemed to be conducting some sort of evaluation. The arrival of Luo Nan and the others caused the free activity space of the booth to become narrow. Luo Nan didn't care about this. He walked straight to the front of the center of the booth. This was the best observation point. It didn't matter if it was the original laboratory or the current transformation imitation exhibition area. Of course, there were people at this point. Luo Nan just ignored them. The person in front heard the noise behind him. He turned his head and saw that Luo Nan was about to collide with him. He originally wanted to berate Luo Nan, but his scalp went numb when he met Luo Nan's gaze. He didn't know why, but his legs crossed and he staggered to the side. This person saw Luo Nan's face clearly at this time. His face turned white with a swish. Bai Xinyan gave Luo Nan an introduction in a very considerate manner. This is Dr. Song Can from the Deep Blue Laboratory's Western Pacific Ocean Observation Center. Luo Nan completely ignored Bai Xinyan's introduction. After the figure flashed out of his front line of vision, Luo Nan completely ignored it. He just cast his gaze calmly towards the equipment on the booth. He also cast his gaze towards the back of the equipment. There was a projection area that was still empty for the time being. Luo Nan's behavior was seriously lacking in manners. But the original group of people on the booth, Dr. Song Can, were mostly connected to the inner world. So they recognized Luo Nan. They just didn't expect that the main character would actually come this early. They didn't dare to have any objections. Dr. Song Can was a relatively simple researcher. He didn't have any extraordinary powers. He nearly had a heart attack when he suddenly saw this face that was labeled as the most dangerous face in a laboratory. He clutched his chest and wanted to run away, but his legs went soft. He was unable to move. Blood Demon walked forward at this time. He stood side by side with Luo Nan. He asked despite knowing the answer. How is it? Do you feel a bit emotional? Luonan didn't respond. This continued for about 10 seconds before he slowly swung his head and swept his gaze across the two areas of the booth. Blood Demon was actually the gaze of everyone on the booth. They unconsciously and unconsciously followed Luonan's gaze. But it didn't take long before the hearts of a few people who knew the situation more or less jumped. The old equipment arranged along the top of the circular arc could be considered to have been cleaned up, or perhaps it was so clean that everything could be seen with a single glance. There was nothing but equipment here. Blood Demon had confidently pointed out the split-page notebook. There was no trace of it at all. Blood Demon's eyelids twitched twice. He heard Luonan whisper at this time, unsightly. Chapter 1034. Luonan didn't need Blood Demon to play the supporting role. He continued to speak, his voice growing louder and louder. The function of the equipment itself, the environment that carries the equipment, the object of research, and the direction of research. If any two of the above four were done well, the current situation wouldn't be like this. Blood Demon laughed in the end. My boy, your focus is a bit on that. There's nothing I can do about it. Sometimes, people's thoughts are very laughable. Luonan's old and experienced way of speaking was a bit comical. However, he was most likely aware of this. Soon, he jabbed his own chest with his finger. For example, me. The gazes of practically everyone on the stage were focused on Luonan. They looked at Luonan's sudden internal monologue. After receiving the invitation from the Jadeite Light ship, I've always had a thought in my mind. The people on this ship are all going against me. They are participating in the auction and bidding around my grandfather's laboratory. They are undoubtedly mocking me. At the very least, they are accomplices of my enemies. In the end, I came here to fight with these people. Of course, this is also an opportunity for me to catch them all in one fell swoop. Some people's eyelids twitched. Some people whistled. The former was like Song Kansas. The latter was like Blood Demon. Blood Demon was conscious of his own perspective once more. He chuckled and followed up. That scene was quite dramatic. What was the reason that caused you to change your mind, my boy? Blood Demon's raised eyebrows weren't a hint at all. Instead, they were a clear indication. Luonan believed that as long as Blood Demon's following answer was even the slightest bit related, Blood Demon would dare to shout nonsense like, I'm saving the world. Luonan's response to this was, Who said I changed? Huh. Well, I should say that there was a period of time in between when I wanted to change. Mr. Blood Demon, your interpretation is quite convincing. But when I came to the ship and walked here, I feel that. Luonan furrowed his brows. He spent a bit of time to organize his words. If I want to forcefully distort my sense of beauty in order to coexist with these people in this world, then I should either close my eyes or wash away the world I see before my eyes. All right, since Luonan's language ability was lacking, his way of speaking appeared to be a bit of a chinibu. It matched with his age. However, among all the people present, who would simply treat such words as chinibu, words to deal with them? The Blood Demon glanced at the equipment on the booths again and subconsciously touched his cheeks. Is it really that bad? I'm starting to doubt my own aesthetic judgment. What's bad about it? Wan Luhua took the initiative to ask with great interest. Human. Luonan's answer was even more concise, and it was even more unexpected. Let's just say half. At least not long ago, he regarded human as one of the 5 internal organs. His gaze moved from Bycinyan's face to Dr. Songkan's. Then, he swept his gaze over the other people at the booth. The people standing in front of these instruments on this poorly restored exhibition stand should be pure researchers and explorers. Now what these people are thinking. Emotions, desires, inclinations. I don't approve of the things that have been accumulated. Bycinyan's expression was natural, but the faces of those below the doctor's level were hard to describe. Blood Demon scratched his head a bit at Luonan's reaction. I didn't get the feeling that you, brother, have moral cleanliness when we were chatting. Or are you just a bit emotional? In fact, not many people on Earth can achieve such a harsh standard. Not really. Even if you have different thoughts and selfish motives when faced with a complex and profound research subject. You don't have the energy to think about these messy things. When you are faced with a sandstorm evolved from shattered fragments of space and time, a sandstorm that could corrode buildings, lives, and even the space and time that holds you. If you want to find valuable things in this maze, how can you do it without the harshest of concentration? Blood Demon blinked. He wasn't sure if Luo Nin wanted to tell him something, or if Luo Nin was intentionally revealing something, or if he was declaring something, or if Luo Nin was simply venting his emotions because of the exhibition stand or the notebook. Luo Nin was far too unstable in this state. It was far too hard to grasp. Blood Demon was suddenly unable to feel Luo Nin's pulse. Luo Nin turned around at this time. He turned from facing the equipment to face the chaotic flow of people in the exhibition hall. The special atmosphere on this side of the exhibition stand was actually quite eye-catching. Many people strolling around the exhibition hall cast their gazes over. Some of them recognized Luo Nin. Some of them recognized Blood Demon, Wan Luo, and some others. So much so that a circle of people unwittingly gathered around them. All sorts of gazes were cast over. Luo Nin met the concentrated fire of these complicated gazes. He suddenly asked, "These should be the people who support related research and consume the results of research." The first answer was actually by Xinyan. All the participants on this ship represent practically 90% of the distortion industrial system. From upstream to downstream, from capital to scientific research, from production to consumption. They cover everything. Luo Nin's lips twitched. Is that so? These people are the ones who have the closest contact with distortion. They're the ones who trace it back to its source. Looking at it as a whole, looking at it from the current situation, they are truly rotten to the core. Rotten skeletal frames, rotten mental structures, rotten desires driven, rotten tendencies of thought. If I'm not mistaken, 99% of the people here won't delve deeply into the distortion itself. They just hope to obtain money, satisfy their desire for power, or perhaps stay young forever. Blood Demon felt that Luo Nin's description was quite consistent with his previous description and criticism of the old system. He wanted to strike the iron while it was hot and pull Luo Nin's thoughts. But he never expected Luo Nin to take the initiative to turn his face. "Mr. Blood Demon, I remember you saying that judging things as they are is the most extreme way of thinking. I did say that. I also said that a mature system must avoid excessive polishing of individual links. Oftentimes, individuals full of flaws are the precondition for a system to take shape." Luo Nin had said all the right and wrong things. Even with Blood Demon's mouth, he actually found it a bit difficult to continue. He and Wan Luo locked gazes. Even though they were quite familiar with each other, they were unable to completely decipher each other's emotions and reactions. It was just like how they deciphered Luo Nin right now. But the current Luo Nin had already sorted out the entire clue and theme through these garrulous descriptions and his unique way of thinking. We can view the distortion industrial system as a system. We can tolerate its low conception, tolerate its many flaws, tolerate its slow progress. But we cannot tolerate its rigidity and lack of vitality. Blood Demon finally grasped the opportunity to intervene. "You feel that there isn't enough vitality inside." Luo Nin's face was expressionless. "No, it's the opposite. Although the majority of the people here have a messy body and soul frame, and their desires and thoughts are nauseating, it is qualified to be a living system. It can even be said to be full of vigor and vitality, with limitless potential. I'm just saying that when you clearly know what kind of environment the flies and maggots will be most active in, you will at least do your best to stay as far away from that place as possible. You will bring along all the things you believe to be the most precious. So, let's hurry up and resolve the problem here." Chapter 1035. The proper business Luo Nin was talking about was undoubtedly the split-page notebook. He asked Blood Demon directly, "Your information is correct, right? It's impossible for it to be wrong. As for the situation, let's ask." Blood Demon turned to ask Song Can, "Hey, Was there a notebook here before? Songkin shook his head subconsciously. TSK. Blood Demon pursed his lips when he didn't get the answer he was hoping for. He looked at Luonan again, but Luonan didn't seem to be happy or angry. The Blood Demon blinked and suddenly clapped his hands. This is a good thing. Those who should be here are not here. Doesn't it mean that the value of my information is maximized? Perhaps you can say that. Luonan actually agreed to this point. At this moment, Luonan and Blood Demon had a tacit understanding. He understood what the Blood Demon meant. Let's assume that Blood Demon's information was correct without a doubt. The special notebook from the 70 format had indeed been brought onto the Jadeite Light, and it had indeed been used to tease Luonan. Then, with its ambiguous identity in the auction catalog and its ambiguous identity in the photo album, if it was placed openly on the stage, it would be obvious that it was an auction item. Things would be troublesome, and they would have to go through a lot of trouble. And in this current situation, it didn't matter if they wanted to give Luonan a surprise attack, or if there was an oversight in the arrangements, or if the auction house simply didn't take this seriously at all. On a legal level, things were becoming simpler. All he had to do was let the dust settle before the notebook was placed on the stand. Of course, the premise for such an assumption was that the Blood Demon's information was reliable. Blood Demon was quite confident in this. He even winked at Luonan. Aren't you going to raise the pay a bit? If you agree, I'll get another pattern from Old Man's secret deed for you. Luonan didn't pay any attention to him. He just stood there quietly, a bit lost in thought. At least in the eyes of others, this was correct. The Blood Demon did not think much of it. Instead, he rubbed his fists and said, I didn't expect that we would have to deduce at the very beginning. Come on, let's go through the situation. Tacker, you wouldn't make a low-level mistake with this list, would you? Uncle Shwe. Tacker's dark face looked a little awkward. He subconsciously turned his head away, his eyes wandering. In every corner of the exhibition hall, a large number of surveillance devices were installed. Perhaps it should be said that it was certain that the people and events on the exhibition stage were all being observed and evaluated by certain important figures. He had been forcefully pulled into the group, and this was something that could be easily explained. However, if he was too active, did he really think that the other side wouldn't let him off easily? The problem was that the Blood Demon knew very well what Tacker was fussing about. However, the latter was definitely not the kind of benevolent elder who would care for his juniors. The Blood Demon raised half of his eyebrows. He was obviously dissatisfied with Tacker's hesitant attitude. But before he could speak, Luonan jabbed him from the side. Don't waste time. Watch the recording again. The number of transcendents on this ship is a little too much. Luonan's first two sentences could be said to be completely unrelated. However, Blood Demon understood. Yes, we're not the only ones who arrived early. Star Wizard, Connie, Black Lion. None of them are easy to deal with. Are you sure it's one of them? I haven't found any observable areas, but they're at least very close to them. Also, there are more than 3 of them. I'm thinking that if there really is something special about that notebook, I could try to find some clues from a distance. Oh, do you think that thing has some sort of special radiation? Your recording gave me this feeling. Blood Demon shrugged. It was very clear that Luonan had searched the entirety of the Jadeite Light while he was distracted. This sort of ability might be hard for normal people to imagine, but it wasn't particularly out of line in the eyes of Transcendence. Blood Demon could even understand the problem Luonan was facing right now. The closer one approached the material world with mental senses, the greater the resistance of mutual interference. The more interference one received, the more range one could cover, and the more limited the details one could capture. Needless to say, the objects of observation included transcendents who could distort the laws of mental and material structure. Every single one of them, in their natural state, would form distortions and concealment effects against mental senses. Under these conditions, fuzzy positioning was relatively easy. However, overcoming interference and accurately searching for an inanimate object that wasn't large in size was indeed a difficult problem. Of course, this was a difficult problem, and it was a difficult problem of absolute high standards. For most mental abilities, Their mental senses were limited by their talents and their physical and divine frames. Basically, the moment they were awakened, the frequency would be whatever it was. Whether it was near or deep space, there was no room for discussion. How could Luo Nin be like him? It looked like he could casually change frequency as easily as drinking plain water. Even that old woman, Death, which had to go through many years of tempering and cultivation in order to be able to freely jump and switch between several rather practical zones. There was no need to talk about other people. Therefore, only Luo Nin possessed this sort of way of thinking. Blood Demon could roughly understand, but he didn't agree with it. There's no need to go through so much trouble. We can just find them by ourselves. A few steps and a few words. This is a necessary social interaction. It's much more reliable than your hypothesis. Luo Nin persisted. It's a few steps and a few words per person, right? If we watch the recording, it might only take a few minutes. Blood Demon sighed. Brother, this is high-level intelligence from a secret channel. If I release it in public, I'll offend people. Aren't you selling me out? Luo Nin's true body wasn't here. Some things were more troublesome. Things like watching a recording lacked a built-in playback device, so it could only be played outside. It wasn't that Blood Demon didn't let it go before, but how could it be the same in a street cafe that was so far away from each other in a scene that was so closely related? Really? Luo Nin was very astonished. I thought that accompanying me to the booth was already a clear enough stance. Now it looks like the tolerance of a true god is more outstanding than I imagined. Or perhaps the level of tacit understanding is higher? How could that be? Kids these days were far too sensitive. Blood Demon spread his hands under Wan Liuhua's gaze that was like a smile that wasn't a smile. If you want to watch, then watch. Even if I'm a good person, I'll do it all the way. Blood Demon's words were mostly to raise the price in a pitiful manner. He was quite straightforward when it came to doing things. Soon, the secret recording that had been played before was displayed once more on this booth. It naturally attracted the gazes of many people. Luo Nin didn't care about the external influence caused by the recording. He stared at the area of dim light and shadow that couldn't be considered particularly clear. A few seconds later, he suddenly asked, "Tell me, where was it at that time?" Chapter 1036. Luo Nin's gaze slid from the center of the arcing distributed equipment to the two sides. The left side, the right side, a few rounds. He had raised a question before, but the direction was unclear. There were even fewer people who could follow his train of thought, so no one had responded for the time being. Luo Nin didn't mind. He himself was organizing his train of thought. He muttered to himself, "It's definitely not the main central laboratory. Then, is it the left claw corridor or the right claw corridor? Is it the front or the back?" Blood Demon looked over with a subtle gaze. The gazes of the others were more or less the same. Luo Nin's words more or less revealed a few things. And vice versa. These things weren't important. Luo Nin stared at the unclear video in front of him. He felt that Blood Demon's playback method was a bit conservative. Make it bigger. Do your best to restore it. Blood Demon rolled his eyes, but he still adjusted the size of the video according to Luo Nin's words. He restored it to the size of a human. Limited by the quality of the video, the entire image inevitably became more blurry. At first glance, it looked like a group of ghostly shadows flipping on the display stage. The people who saw the video for the first time really couldn't figure it out for a while. Blood Demon continued to advise, "Most of the time, it's better to use your mouth and your brain. Thinking is better than socializing. If you want to find radiation from this, you might as well directly ask the content provider." Blood Demon turned to ask by Xinyan as he spoke. "What's his name again?" "He's the provider of this equipment. Horn Demon, right? Is he here yet?" Bai Xinyan smiled and shook her head. I'm not sure." During this short conversation, quite a few of the surrounding visitors and staff members tiptoed over. Some even came over. Some even asked the people on this side, causing a buzzing noise. Luo Nin still didn't care. From his perspective, according to the Toyama auction house's rotten nature, this video would most likely be played at the auction. Otherwise, how would they raise the starting price? Since they were all watching it, There was no difference between watching it earlier and later. Besides, he might be the one who watched the video the least compared to the people standing on the display stage. Where do you think it is? Luonin asked Bai Xinyan this time. He highly suspected that Bai Xinyan was the type of person who watched the video a lot. Bai Xinyan had been leaning against Luo Nan this entire time. She clearly felt the meaning behind Luo Nan's words and subconsciously moved away. She observed Luo Nan's expression. In the end, she smiled and shook her head. I don't see it. He did not get an answer twice in a row. Luo Nan memorized a number, but he didn't continue to pursue the matter. It seemed that he was studying this video, and he became entranced once more. However, when Bai Xinyan looked at his face, she saw that the young man's eyes had already closed. He only raised his head slightly to listen to the details of the voice in the recording, but it didn't sound like it. It was more like he was daydreaming. Could it be that there was some other basis in the unseen world that would help Luo Nan obtain an answer? If it were anyone else, Bai Xinyan would have most likely laughed it off. But since it was Luo Nan, she was a bit uncertain. From the analysis of various information chains, this was actually one of Luo Nan's most terrifying states. This was because no one knew what a master of mental senses like Luo Nan, who stood at the apex of humanity, could see and experience in the end. Perhaps it wasn't even in the same dimension. Bai Xinyan gazed quietly at Luo Nan. She saw that he seemed calm, but it also seemed that gloomy clouds were accumulating between his brows. Unknowingly, the professional smile on his face, which had become an instinct, became somewhat difficult to maintain. The current Luo Nan already possessed the power to make other living beings empathize with him. Perhaps it would be a bit difficult to accompany him in laughing. But he was truly unhappy. The billions of people in the entire world might be a step ahead of him in crying. Dark clouds pressing down on the city. Bai Xinyan sighed softly. And at this time, a new message was sent over through her personal terminal. It wasn't any important information. It was just a bad weather warning. It said that there might be heavy rainfall in the nearby seas, accompanied by thunderstorms and gales. This was a short-term forecast, made in response to the changes in the surrounding natural conditions. Even though they were about to enter the 22nd century, the weather forecast could not be completely trusted. Bai Xinyan still remembered that when she saw it this morning, it said that the Central Pacific region was sunny and calm for several days in a row. Before she could finish her thoughts, a faint vibration came over. The reflection and filtering of the many layers of the deck and the walls had long since become indistinct. Bai Xinyan naturally formed an association. Was it thunder? Bai Xinyan, who was cooped up in the cabin of the ship, had no idea what the weather was like outside. But in the hinterland of the old continent, over 10,000 kilometers away, in the boundless highland wilderness, one could see the violent and abnormal changes in the color of the sky as long as one's eyes weren't blind. Just a moment ago, the sky had been clear for tens of thousands of miles, and the visibility was good. But in just a few minutes, the sky was covered in dark clouds. Clouds covered the sky. The sudden change of light and shadow made many sensitive creatures on the wasteland raise their vigilance. Some even stopped their original activities and looked around, but some were still immersed in the established rhythm of hiding, hunting, and eating. Next to a small freshwater lake, a similar situation was occurring on a large scale. As the only open-air water source within dozens of square kilometers, all kinds of creatures filled up almost every ecological niche around the freshwater lake, forming a visible food chain. The creatures were either careful, cold, alert, or ignorant. On the whole, it was still a natural chaos. At the corner of the small lake, a brown bear that had clearly shown a state of abnormality was there, gorging itself. And the wild donkey herd that had just lost a member regrouped dozens of meters away from the bear, sticking close to the surface of the lake to absorb water again. This could be considered the harmony of nature. However, in this realm of nature, there were still some elements that deviated from the whole. The most typical example was the hairless monkey that was wrapped in a sturdy fiber and preferred to walk on two legs instead of crawling on all fours. But because it was missing its right forelimb, it could not crawl on all fours. At this moment, this hairless monkey was similar to the mutated brown bear. It had just killed a wild donkey, and it was somewhat awkward as it used one hand to press down on the prey and tear it apart to obtain nutrients from the fresh meat. Other than that, it did not care about anything else. If that was all, it would only be a slight incongruity. The problem was that this hairless monkey was changing. There was some unusual squirming on the surface of its body, undulating against the fiber fabric that was wrapped around it. At the same time, there was a rustling sound coming from it. Especially as the clouds in the sky thickened and the sky darkened, there was light swimming and flickering under the layer of clothing, vaguely forming a chain that formed a net. Chapter 10:37. The hairless monkey didn't care about this change. In fact, with his current muddle-headed state, he was only focused on the prey beneath him. Eating was all he had to do at the moment. However, his eating process was also distorted due to the abnormality. At first, he used his teeth to bite his prey, but at some point in time, all his teeth fell off one by one. That wasn't all. They also fell off. To be more precise, they were separated. There were also the muscles that his mouth needed to move. Before that, there was still the mask that covered his face. Soon, his entire face, including all his facial organs, was separated. At first, the parts that fell off were still barely connected by blood vessels and nerves. But after a few breaths, these connections also fell apart. Later, even the bones that were pieced together to form the skull were disassembled along the bone gaps, and air leaked out from all sides. But this person didn't notice it at all. This was because even though his entire head had been disassembled, and even his brain, which was barely a hole, began to distort, confuse, and churn as it squirmed, he still maintained a basic system framework. However, what kept these disassembled human body parts together was no longer the original life system that was made up of blood vessels, nerves, skin, flesh, and bones. Instead, they were thread-like, faintly discernible, semi-illusory lines. They resonated with the chains of light that moved on his body, like electric currents that pierced through the air in a special environment. These semi-illusory electric lines seemed to have some kind of magnetic force, and they could carry out complex exchanges of energy and information. Under their restraint, the head of the hairless monkey that had fallen apart was still a system that continued to operate, even though the way it operated was completely different from that of a normal creature. There was no doubt that some unimaginable power was being used. At the same time, some information hidden deep within the head was being steadily transmitted out through a powerful replacement system. The feeding was still going on, but as the main body of systematic behavior, the hairless monkeys no longer relied on chewing. Instead, they pierced the remains of their prey through the electric lines and transmitted the strange power over, turning the relatively intact, wild donkey carcass into minced meat that was 100 times finer than the skull that had been dismembered earlier. Then, the fragments that were broken down later were absorbed by the alien head, which had broken down a step earlier but still maintained its system. It could be said that it had gone through a deeper fusion. It could also be considered as eating. If they didn't care about their sense of belonging, this way of eating was obviously more efficient than a natural and primitive digestive system. It looked cleaner, and there were almost no leftovers. However, from a visual point of view, such a scene was a little too extreme. The creatures scattered on this side of the lake were more or less affected. Not far away, the mutated brown bear stopped eating and retreated with its prey, letting out a low snoring sound from its throat. It seemed to be a warning, but it was more to give himself courage. But to the hairless monkey that had just finished eating, it didn't mean much. By the time it finished eating, the head, which had long since changed beyond recognition, actually began to converge inwards under the effects of the electric lines. Countless parts of its original body, regardless of whether or not it still maintained its basic structure, and regardless of what its original biological structure was, were casually pieced together. In short, its nose wasn't a nose, and its eyes weren't eyes. It was more like a lump of mud mixed together from different waste materials. There was no lack of bone rubbing and penetrating, and it was common to see nerves and blood vessels fluttering and nodding in the air. There was no need to even mention the situation where the epidermal tissues were rubbed together. But this kind of phenomenon didn't persist for too long. This complicated and bizarre system clearly possessed some sort of memory, aside from disintegration and stitching. The enormous and ugly lump of flesh and mud miraculously recovered its original appearance after 2 or 3 rounds of rubbing. It was restored to the hairless monkey, which was the face of a normal human. During this entire process, the monkey absorbed enough energy to sustain itself, but it also exposed a few things during the continuous disintegration and churning. It was then projected tens of thousands of kilometers away. Being able to restore itself is really dogshit luck. Luo then opened his eyes and muttered in a low voice. But it seems that this really is the first. What's the first? Blood Demon's ears were sharp. He heard what Luo Nan said, but he wasn't able to understand what Luo Nan was referring to. After all, it corresponded to a distant real-time image deep in the hinterland of the old continent. It also involved Luo Nan's exclusive thoughts. Luo Nan didn't respond, but his originally gloomy brows relaxed a bit. In a certain sense, Luo Nan's soul cloak was like a satellite hack in a real-time strategy game. It dispelled the fog of war within the scope of the Earth, bringing him convenience that exceeded his imagination. However, the evil poison pollution that was accidentally brought out from the relay station brought enormous damage to the soul cloak, and even to Luo Nan's entire system structure on a mental plane. It also caused the fog of war to once again obscure his field of vision. There were a few pieces of good news amidst the ruins. For example, Luo Nan's believers. They used various methods to carry out deep interference effects throughout the world. They still maintained contact with him. They were like casually tossed scouting units. They passed through the fog of war and illuminated observable areas of varying sizes. The size of these observable areas was clearly proportional to the strength of the scouting units themselves. It was also closely related to Luo Nan's projected attention. The soul cloak and other structures of the mental system were slowly recovering on the basis of these scouting units. They attempted to be pieced together once more. There was one more thing besides these scouting units. As the mica structure took shape, it had a characteristic that was closely related to the water vapor environment. This caused the damaged structure of the mental system to continue its recovery process, and it became a bit entangled with the soul cloak. Luonan didn't see any negative things for the time being, but there were a few unexpected harvests. Indeed, Luo Nan was currently paying attention to the horned demon roaming the wastelands of the old continent. This horned demon was originally a tool that Luo Nan had unearthed from the special power of the magneto-optical mica in the offline testing scene. He forcefully controlled and twisted it into a tool. Luo Nan had an additional origin with the embryonic form of the mica structure. Back then, Luo Nan had only used him as a carrier and fulcrum to clash with a true god. Luo Nan didn't expect this tool to actually produce an additional effect at this time. The thick cloud structure formed by the interweaving of the mica and the soul cloak around the horned demon seemed to have been stimulated by some sort of stirring. It became exceptionally lively. On the other hand, the analysis of the horned demon's messed up body and soul frame was exceptionally sharp and efficient. This wasn't just reflected in the excavation of the horned demon's memories. It was an extremely ideal reference model. At the very least, Luo Nan had used the mica to dissociate tens of thousands of living beings from last night until now. None of them were as complete as the horned demon. Originally, it was just a seed that was casually planted into the soil. Now, it was giving birth to a pleasantly surprised sprout. All right, it was quite awkward to give the horned demon such a position. And now wasn't the best time to do experiments. In any case, whether it was the mica or the horned demon, they both had a set of basic behavior that could maintain and continue their existence even though they didn't have self-awareness. Right now, the mica was still in the initial stages of self-proliferation and evolution. There was still an unknown distance between it and the true magneto-optical mica. It was also limited by the broken state of the soul cloak, so it was unable to rapidly expand. With the Horn Demon as a support point, it would be good to temporarily open a sub-base and see what the results would be. Luo Nan quickly collected his thoughts. He needed a simple and straightforward answer more. The Horn Demon's memories were a very good source. So it's like this. Luo Nan's voice was a bit clearer. It carried an emotion of relief. A human's memory information wasn't a clear video stored in the space of the brain. However, Luo Nan used multiple methods to search and compare back and forth. He still possessed a relatively accurate answer. So he knew. This was the first time the Horn Demon and the others entered the 70-format laboratory. What was it like before the equipment was disassembled? The more he knew, the more he felt that the current booth was unsightly. What an eyesore. Probably because someone had heard what he said, there were strange sounds of gurgling and clicking in the booth area. Many people heard it, but they couldn't identify the source of the sound for a while. This bit of abnormality couldn't be hidden from Blood Demon and Wan Luhua. The gazes of the two cut across a few important nodes, intersecting with each other in the middle. But they happened to coincidentally take a step back. The booth suddenly swayed, almost in sync with the movements of the two extraordinaries. At the same time, the sharp sounds of metal cracking and heavy objects being pulled and scraped rang out. It nearly pierced the eardrums. Many people on the booth cried out in alarm. Some unlucky people even fell off. They weren't at the edge of the booth. But the problem was that Luo Nan's restoration didn't move the equipment, but the booth itself. The arc-shaped booth cracked from its roots. Even though it was a relatively complex and precise steel structure, there were still quite a few auction equipment installed below it. The total weight of the equipment on the stage was several tons, but it still moved and tore away. The originally ordinary arc-shaped booth's front was forcefully pulled forward, forming a structure similar to that of a bull's horn. Of course, some people understood in their hearts that this actually had to be combined with the back half of the booth that was barely intact to form an overall layout similar to that of a crab. And this sort of deformation came at the cost of completely destroying the booth structure. As a result, enormous cracks were formed, smashing all of the booth's preset functions. It also destroyed the supporting points of the booth's steel structure. It was reasonable to say that the next step would be a destructive collapse, but the final visual effect was actually pretty good. Every single piece of equipment from the 70-format Research Institute was still stable and solid, even though they were only supported by a small half of a broken steel plate and a support frame. It was unknown where the support came from, but there was also a sense of ancientness and vicissitudes that were like ruins. So much so that the occasional sparks of electricity from the damaged equipment below the stage could be used as supporting elements to set off. It was like a surreal painting that had been erased of rationality. Chapter 1038. In the middle section of the relatively intact booth, Blood Demon stepped on the steel plate under his feet. He felt the shaking sensation as if it could collapse at any moment. He rubbed his chin. To collapse or not to collapse? That's the question. What do you think? Wan Luhua had the standard standing posture of standing like a pine. In fact, through her extremely sharp senses, she was actually doing the same thing as Blood Demon. The booth under her feet had become a very interesting research object. However, Wan Luhua never said anything irresponsible. She calmly said, "This isn't my area of expertise. But no matter how I look at it, this effect is our doing, isn't it?" Blood Demon's finger swiped across the torn and distorted equipment display area in front of him. Just as he said, this kind of strength method that could cut through metal and forcibly shift positions was the specialty of the fleshly adepts. It must be known that 90% of the booth was made of metal, and the total weight was several tons or more. To achieve such an effect in an instant would be difficult even if professional equipment was moved over. In other words, the fleshly adepts, who far exceeded the limits of the human body, possessed such an ability in theory. You're overthinking it. You don't have this sense of design. I can't stop them from collapsing either. In front of an expert, any quibbling was meaningless. Blood Demon admitted it directly. However, continuing with the previous question, he still found it difficult to make the corresponding judgment of value. Should I say this is a clever move, or a stupid move. Just as they had discussed, the key to the scene presented by the current booth was not about tearing or destruction. Instead, it was about the sense of design. The entire steel structure of the booth had been torn to pieces. If one followed the normal laws of physics, this place should have long collapsed into a complete mess. One wouldn't even be able to find a place to stand. However, the reality was that the equipment used in front had only shifted along with the torn and distorted booth. This shift was carried out on a rather neat surface. Of course, the most difficult thing was to achieve normalized stability after the destructive shift. If the current floor of the booth was covered with a layer of boards, people would probably never imagine that the supporting area below would already be a mess. The two transcendents by their sides could create destruction that was 10 times or even 100 times more tragic than what they were doing now. The only thing lacking was this neat and tidy sense of design. It would probably require them to put in thousands or even tens of thousands of times more effort. How could he do it? This was because Luo didn't directly destroy and tear apart the structure of matter to create displacement. Instead, he used sufficient soul strength to interfere with the structure of space and time. He forcefully bypassed the difficulties that would give even extraordinaries a headache. Luo then used a method that was countless times more difficult to achieve. You're from the mental side. You always like to go around in circles. Blood Demon grinned as if he had a toothache. Aren't you tired? This time he asked Luo Nan. In fact, he already knew the answer. It seemed that Luo Nan had calmly and effortlessly completed the dismantling and reassembling of the stage. His water vapor body had turned somewhat incorporeal and transparent. Thankfully, while the Blood Demon and Wan Luhua were chatting, the water vapor clone became normal again. Luo Nan just nodded at the two extraordinaries. He then stared at the new booth, deep in thought. The redesigned layout of the equipment seemed to fit Wan Luhua's taste very well. She smiled and shifted her gaze from left to right. She even asked for confirmation. The location of the recording should be near the 7th device on the right. There's a row of bookshelves missing there. In the end, it can't be perfect. Wan Luhua rarely took the initiative to speak, so Luo Nan had to respond. But between the lines, Luo Nan was still dissatisfied with the current situation. I'm afraid some things fell apart when they were dismantled. These things are all for show now. None of them are plugged in. Also, the space is too cramped. In the end, they can't stretch out. Blood Demon chuckled twice. You're dissatisfied? Don't you see the people who set up the venue? They want to cry, but have no tears. It must be known that there was actually an elevator below this booth. It was closely linked to the main venue. With Luo Nan's actions, the scheduled auction venue might be completely ruined. Blood Demon looked at his watch. It was 2:57 in the afternoon in T-City. There were still 5 hours. It was very clear that the conference affairs team was going to be tossed around. Blood Demon was rejoicing in other people's misfortune when he suddenly felt something was wrong. He turned around and saw Luo Nan and Wan Luhua staring at him. What's wrong? Aren't you going to put the recording in the right position? Yeah. Only now did Blood Demon discover that he had become the legendary projectionist. Yes, a technical job. My ass. The corner of his mouth twitched, but he still followed Blood Demon's instructions and transferred the entire recording to the position indicated by the two. He was honest, but he was a technical worker. It was more appropriate to grumble a bit. You finally remember to look for the notebook. What were you doing before? Life always has a sense of ritual. Huh? Luo Nan had a serious expression. Reconstructing at once. My mood is better. It's easier to stimulate inspiration when my mood is on the right path. Blood Demon laughed dryly without saying anything. On the contrary, Wan Luhua asked with interest, So, have you found your inspiration yet? Yeah, I'm still looking. No matter how well Blood Demon did his work in the early stages, no matter how much he understood Luo Nan, he couldn't help but roll his eyes at this time. Wan Luhua responded with a smile. No rush. There's plenty of time. Luo Nan felt the kindness in her words. Though he didn't quite understand where it came from, he still responded with a smile. Actually, Luo Nan's train of thought was quite clear by now. The information from the horned demon's memories gave him the most direct direction. Actually, this point was also reflected in the recording. He just wanted to make it clear. At this time, the recording restarted once again. It reached the stage where a certain person flipped through the pages quickly. A close-up shot of the notebook's title page was shown on the screen. Luonin didn't continue watching. He exhaled softly and lowered his head. Soon, the surrounding people heard a wave of soft murmurs. The murmurs came from Luonan's mouth. They had a certain rhythm, rising and falling, cycling back and forth. The murmurs were far too vague. Most people couldn't hear the contents clearly. Of course, this didn't include the two extraordinaries. Whether it was Blood Demon or Wan Luhua, they both possessed perception and discernment abilities that surpassed ordinary people. Therefore, they could hear the murmurs clearly. The murmurs were short sentences that were like rhymes. They were divided into 4 paragraphs, and the contents were: the gazes of the two moved away from Luonan's face. They looked to the side and forward. In the recording, the notebook had already been folded open. It was heated by the laser and soon caught fire. The instant the notebook caught fire, the flames charred and curled up the title page. The same content appeared on the paper in the form of words. The words then turned to ash within the flames. My heart is a prison. My heart is a furnace. My heart is a mirror. My heart is a nation. Chapter 1039. There were quite a few intelligent people on the stage. Bai Xinyan was definitely one of them. Even though she did not hear the contents of Luo Nan's murmurs clearly, she was able to make some judgments as she followed the gazes of the two extraordinaries. A new call came in at this time. Bai Xinyan glanced at the caller ID and saw that it was unfamiliar. She chose to reject the call. Her thoughts were diverted, but when her attention returned to this side, she was stupefied once more. On the stage, Luo Nan's murmurs seemed to be mixed with some peculiar echoes. It sounded like the faint sound of thunder that could be heard before, but after several refractions, it became inexplicably clear once more. Bai Xinyan wanted to make a further analysis, but she saw Luo Nan raise his head. She did not know when his lips had closed. He gave a deep glance at the equipment on the stage, then he turned around and left. Anyone who saw this action would be stupefied. Completely subconsciously, Bai Xinyan strode forward to follow him. Aside from her, Blood Demon and Wan Luhua, these two extraordinaries actually followed Luo Nan's lead. At the very least, they had curious expressions. Even Tucker wore a bitter expression as he followed behind Luo Nan in silence. The people who had been watching the liveliness in the surroundings had long been scared out of their wits by the unforeseen event on the stage. They saw Luo Nan take the lead and step down, and each and every one of them hastily retreated to make a path. As for the other side of the stage, only Song Can and the others were left. They were either on the stage, below the stage, or in the cracks. Each and every one of them was dumbstruck. They did not know how to react. Tell them to stay a bit further away. Luo Nan suddenly spoke. His thoughts were jumping wildly, but his direction was still unclear. They can't blame others if they get lost in a bit. Bai Xinyan was barely able to grasp the rhythm. She turned her head to glance back and said, the stage will be cleared. It won't collapse, right? Huh? Blood Demon turned his head as well. He swept a few glances, then rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Luonin shot a glance at Bai Xinyan, not saying much. Bai Xinyan responded with a smile. She followed Luo Nan very closely, but at this moment, she certainly couldn't hug him anymore. She just forced herself to walk side by side with Luo Nan and tilted her head to look at his profile. In the end, Bai Xinyan didn't have the ability to peer into people's hearts. All she could see in her eyes was Luo Nan's gentle facial contours. His gaze was probably looking straight ahead, and his pursed lips possessed a bit of maturity and rigidity. Luo Nan was able to relate to the current situation. Many of these had been damaged by the childish fine hair on the corners of the young man's lips and cheeks. It was pretty much universally recognized by all sorts of research. Luo Nan's physical development had been tempered by drugs that affected his nervous system for many years. There were also a few other factors that interfered with his growth. Luo Nan's growth was slower than that of his peers. This was reflected in his height, hair, voice changing period, and even his personality. From a traditional physiological and psychological perspective, this was a sensitive child who was in the rebellious phase and could explode at any time. Of course, if an ordinary rebellious child wanted to explode, he could totally slap them. But for Luo Nan, for this psychic expert who possessed inhumanly powerful strength, the so-called explosive point was not the least bit exaggerated. Perhaps the earth would explode with a single slap. And from Xinyan's perspective, the most dangerous thing about Luo Nan was that he had obtained his profound theoretical system from who knows where. It could be said to be complete and self-consistent. He had his own view and judgment of the external world. Moreover, he could turn the unfathomable thoughts in his mind into reality in a matter of minutes. He didn't need external help. This caused Luo Nan's way of doing things to completely break away from the traditional model. It made people unable to predict and dispel. There were many times when everyone was still suspicious, but the situation had already intensified to an irreparable stage. Just like right now, Xinyan could already smell the scent of losing control. Every step she took seemed to intensify the drumbeat of the curtain being drawn. But she had no way to deal with this. Why do I have to think of a way? Xinyan laughed self-mockingly. She adjusted her breathing a bit, thinking about adjusting her mood before making a plan. And at this time, she suddenly noticed that quite a few people in the audience, who were making way for them, were reacting strangely. The attention of the audience was somewhat diverted, especially to the area where the group of people had already passed. Some people were inexplicably sizing up all around. Some were even tapping their ears. There were also some who were whispering. Xinyan could hear a bit. For example, the echo is too loud. The stage is still collapsing. Let's stay a bit further away. And so on. It's a sound? When this thought became clear, Xinyan's heart suddenly tightened. Yes, a sound. She turned her head to look at Luo Nan. The young man beside her was still pursing his lips. His gaze was looking straight ahead. This was clearly his first time coming here, but he had unknowingly become the leader. God knows where he would lead this group of people to. Well, the most crucial question right now was, Luo Nan had clearly shut his mouth, but the surrounding air still floated with a muffled shockwave. She carefully discerned. The murmuring was still there. It even stirred up the echoes of melancholy thunder. Of course, this thunder was not really thunder. At the very least, it wasn't just thunder. It wasn't just sound waves conducted through the air. It was dark clouds that pervaded above the sea of consciousness. It was a strange creature that rubbed against the front of the antennae of consciousness. Xinyan felt that it was like a sharp blade. It was like a gun barrel that was spinning in front of her forehead. Then everything became clear. Luo Nan's will vibrated in the void, generating endless echoes. Such vibrations were absolutely impossible to circulate within the exhibition hall of Area C-12. They had probably already. On the other side, Blood Demon blew a whistle. He rejoiced in Luo Nan's misfortune, as if he wished for the whole world to be in chaos. Star Shaman has said hello. He's in Area. He's not there. Luo Nan's response was without rhyme or reason, but everyone around him understood. Xinyan sighed soundlessly. It was very clear that with Luo Nan's actions, the entire jadeite light, from top to bottom, inside to outside, no one would be able to escape. The restless thunderclouds really were hovering above their heads. You need to be careful. With that damned witch's nature, she might borrow this disciple to get involved. It's fine as long as she hasn't, Luo Nan responded casually. He then asked, "Who's with him? I don't have your abilities." She didn't take the initiative. "Oh, it's Connie." She said hello. Headquarters actually sent her to act as an advance party. It's her? That makes sense. Luo Nan recalled this person. She was Constance Dalei, a female extraordinary. She was known as the strongest boundary master of the inner world. The two had fought briefly in Chan City. He didn't think too much about it. He continued to sift through. There are two in Area B. They should both be fleshly bodies. They're very solid. Luo Nan's choice of words was very subtle. Next is Area C. Huh? Luo Nan paused for a moment. Then he grinned and said something unrelated. Her Majesty Empress Wu seems to be coming over. Chapter 1040. The commercial plane pierced through the clouds, continuing to correct its direction and altitude as it drew closer to the surface of the sea. Zhang Yingying looked at the scenery through the porthole from within the cabin. She mumbled casually, "Is it going to be thunder?" The wings seemed to be charged. The commercial plane had already pierced through the thick clouds before she finished speaking. The field of view below suddenly opened up. The jadeite glow was like a small and exquisite steel box on the roaring sea surface. It was practically one with the leaden sea surface. Only the fluorescent lines on the landing platform at the top of the ship gave a rather clear indication. The commercial plane communicated with the cruise control tower and began to descend. The noise in the cabin grew louder at this time. "Is the engine broken?" Zhang Yingying subconsciously mentioned this and immediately spat a few times. But no matter what, the noise was there and it was getting louder. Meng Chong, who sat across from Zhang Yingying, unconsciously frowned. "It's not sound waves. It's not purely." He paused for a moment and made a judgment. "There's power at work on the mental plane." "He's fighting with someone?" He Zhang Yingying spoke of was clearly referring to Luo Nan. Zhang Yingying furrowed her brows as she spoke. She did her best to sense the details on the mental plane. "It's not the middle of winter. It's like the clouds above. There's going to be a sudden explosion of thunder." "Huh?" Zhang Yingying inexplicably felt a bit familiar. She moved closer to the porthole and looked outside. The cruise ship continued to approach. It seemed to grow larger and larger. The visual effect was quite astonishing under the support of relative speed. But looking at it this way, there didn't seem to be anything too out of the ordinary. It shouldn't be. Otherwise, this ship would have sunk long ago. Meng Chong did his best to find a more accurate adjective. "Yeah, it's like deterrence." Zhang Yingying clapped her hands. She came to this conclusion faster than Meng Chong. It was for no other reason than the fact that she had prior experience with this. Last year on New Year's Eve, Luo Nen had played this move at Aurora Cloud City. His tyrannical will pervaded the void like a soundless thundercloud, suppressing all sides and causing chaos. Only a few months had passed. Zhang Yingying's memories were still fresh in her mind. A slight reminder triggered her memories. In the end, we still have to fight. Zhang Yingying still remembered that there were a few troublesome characters at Aurora Cloud City back then, but not many. She was on her home turf, but now above the boundless ocean. The Abyss District is not peaceful either. Although Meng Chong was a piece of meat, beside him, there were also no extraordinary species. However, he could use the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District to catch some strange movements of this level. Abyss District. This situation indirectly confirmed Zhang Yingying's worries. She really wanted to observe more directly. The problem was that she didn't have a tool similar to the Bloody Soul Temple, so she could only look at Her Majesty Empress Wu. Making a gentleman's agreement with him is more troublesome than I expected. Under Zhang Yingying's gaze, Her Majesty Empress Wu's gaze left the scroll in her hand, and she shook her head slightly. Zhang Yingying's eyes widened. They're really fighting? It doesn't involve individual domains. Connie is quite gentle most of the time. Star Shaman probably doesn't want to express his position that quickly. The remaining few are all fleshly bodies. Unless Luo Nan fights his way to their door, they probably won't do anything. There are a few extraordinaries on the ship. Zhang Yingying was shocked at first, but she did not receive an answer. She blurted out, "There's nothing Luo Nan can't do." Maybe. As they spoke, the business jet landed steadily in maglev mode. Her Majesty Empress Wu put away the scriptures, rolled them up, got up, and walked out. "Let's go take a look. I hope I won't regret it." "Where's Luo Nan?" As soon as Zhang Yingying got off the plane, she grabbed the receptionist and asked. But how could the receptionist know that? She stammered and couldn't say a complete sentence. Zhang Yingying could not be blamed for this. Luo Nan had a water vapor avatar, and his communications wristband was several thousand kilometers away. If he picked up the call, it was his ability, but if he didn't pick up the call, it was normal. Anyway, he didn't pick up this time. Zhang Yingying was a little anxious. Fortunately, Her Majesty Empress Wu was confident. Go to Area C-12. There was a clear direction for them to take off directly from the top deck. They took a car there, and it didn't take long for the group to arrive at their destination. They saw the work that Luo Nan had just completed. The question was, where was he? Where's Luo Nan? Zhang Yingying stared blankly at the messy display in front of her. He's probably looking for someone. Let's go. Then why did we come here for? Before I die from anger from the trouble he caused, I need to adjust my state of mind. It's only after seeing this that I feel like I'm not stupid. Her Majesty Empress Wu pinched Zhang Yingying's cheek and headed straight for the display. Quite a few spectators were attracted to the display after Luo Nan left, but the vast majority of people were blocked outside. The on-site staff members were blocked outside. No one stopped Her Majesty Empress Wu when she walked over. It wasn't that the on-site staff had good eyesight. In fact, it was more like they were blind. In any case, Her Majesty Empress Wu slowly arrived at the edge of the platform. She didn't go up, just tapping the scripture scroll in her hand against the palm of her other hand. It was as if she was counting a beat. She seemed to be deep in thought. Zhang Yingying and Meng Chong followed her to the front. They could not help but gasp in admiration at this warped yet neat layout. As ability users, they could not help but consider what they would do if they were in her place. What would they do in order to realize all of this? But in the end, they could only look at each other and shake their heads. How did he manage to do this? Zhang Yingying asked, not understanding. Probably, it's an ability that can continuously affect the structure of space and time. This answer was quite clear. However, the one who responded to Zhang Yingying wasn't Her Majesty Empress Wu. It was a woman's voice, but there were a few intentional or unintentional breaks in her words. There was a hissing sound between her words. It carried a mysterious and even sinister flavor. Zhang Yingying jumped in fright. She suddenly turned around and saw a woman wrapped in a wide white robe standing behind her. The woman had just lifted the hood off her head, revealing a delicate and pretty face. An explanation was an explanation, but the woman's gaze wasn't on Zhang Yingying at all. She only stared at Her Majesty Empress Wu, who had just turned around. She spoke with an exceptionally cold tone. Wu Zhao, this is the big trouble you've brought. Yeah, Connie, this is the big trouble you've stirred up. Zhang Yingying stuck out her tongue. She very consciously moved closer to Meng Chong. Without a doubt, the woman standing behind Zhang Yingying and the others was the world's top barrier grandmaster. She had a transcendent status in the Ability User Association, Lady Constance Dollar. In a sense, she was the enemy of Zhang Yingying and the others. Zhang Yingying also noticed that other than Constance, there was also a gentle-looking man who had silently arrived. He wore a casual suit. His figure was tall and straight. He could be considered handsome, and he was smiling from ear to ear. But the problem was that his face was even paler than Constance's. It had reached an unhealthy level. This caused his smile to appear somewhat sinister. Although Zhang Yingying had never seen him in person, she had seen the information. She immediately made a judgment. Star Sorcerer. There was no escaping. Chapter 1041. It seemed that these sorcery guys were all similar. Zhang Yingying had once heard from Her Majesty Empress Wu that although Constance Dalei, a female extraordinaire, had formed her own school of thought when she was young, she had been taught by the necromancer. The two of them had quite a bit of history. Now it seemed that this was indeed the case. As Death Witch's proudest disciple, the Star Shaman's relationship with Constance was obviously not ordinary. However, Zhang Yingying did not know that extraordinaires from Jadelight had entered the venue so early. After all, if not for Blood Demon's interference, they would have only arrived at 8 o'clock in the evening. These two had come so early. It couldn't be that they had nothing better to do and were sunbathing on the ship, right? Her Majesty Empress Wu also asked, "You came so early. Are you going to tour the exhibition hall a second time?" No. I just want to see with my own eyes the ability of Big Trouble to cause trouble. Star Shaman seemed to be better at socializing than Constance, so he automatically took over the conversation. Her Majesty Empress Wu glanced at him. Just go and greet him. He hasn't gone far, right? We are more interested in his work, his plastic arts. Star Shaman smiled as he spoke. When he curled his lips, he looked a little handsome, provided that his pale, almost transparent skin was ignored. It's because of this that we can endure the noise of his abyss area. We didn't know that he has a hobby of chanting scriptures in the abyss area. Chanting scriptures. Has this happened before? Her Majesty Empress Wu seemed to be asking the obvious, but Zhang Yingying thought about it seriously. I don't think so. He's already weird enough. If he chants scriptures every day, what will happen? At this point, Zhang Yingying glanced at the Buddhist scriptures in her boss's hand and stuck out her tongue again. It seemed that she had accidentally poked someone she could not afford to offend. Ah, no. It was the person who paid her salary. Her Majesty Empress Wu did not care. After all, Zhang Yingying did not truly understand what was happening in the abyss area. She tapped the scripture lightly on her palm and turned her gaze back to the exhibition table. He was already emotional, and he was egged on by Blood Demon. God knows what state he's in now, but there has to be something exciting in it. Constance stared intently at the shattered exhibition stand and replied simply, "That's right, it's not a big deal. Maybe. There's no harm in asking." The star shaman made a pointless suggestion. However, the gazes of the three extraordinaries turned to Song Can, who was still in a daze on the stage. Zhang Yingying blinked. An eyewitness? Where have I seen him before? The star sorcerer added, he should be in charge of one of the departments in the Deep Blue Laboratory. Constance recognized it too. The Western Pacific Observatory. It's the organization in charge of observing and researching the spatial interference between the deep blue world and Earth. Her Majesty Empress Wu smiled. I remember. When the coordinates were announced last year, it was him who recorded the explanation video. I always thought it was a secret organization. To be able to hide the exact coordinates of the deep blue world until last year, it's an impressive achievement. It was hard to tell whether Her Majesty Empress Wu's words were sarcasm or praise. The other two transcendents pretended not to understand. There would definitely be differences between the headquarters and the branch in the sharing and handling of some critical information. This circle would also definitely be different from that circle. There was no need to explain any of this. Song Can stopped on the display stage for a long time. He had been given quite a fright by Luo Nan before, but it wasn't to the point where he couldn't recover his wits until now. There was another reason why he stayed behind. This was because he sensed that the display stage, which seemed to be in pieces, was currently displaying a deep content that was extremely closely related to him. At the very least, it was related to the project he was in charge of. Song Can wasn't an ability user. At the very least, he wasn't an ability user in the traditional sense. However, he was able to sit in the position of the person in charge of the observation center. He was able to sense the familiar smell of intercourse in the plane of time and space within this area of approximately 100 square meters. Perhaps it wasn't as strong as the smell that appeared between the space-time of the deep blue world and Earth. However, the feeling that came and went, the feeling that seemed real and illusory, was simply like a beautiful dream. It made him unwilling to wake up. Therefore, he clearly knew that problems would arise if he stayed here for too long. The staff at the scene had indeed tried to clear the area and persuade him to leave, but he still persisted in bringing the researchers under him and nailing himself to the display stage. He wanted to see if he could discover more valuable clues. Right now, the most frustrating thing was that the equipment of the observation center couldn't enter. Distant yet distant. Someone spoke behind him. Yes, that's the smell. Does it feel like a reflection or a link? Oh my, the word link is used too well. Song Can clapped his hands in praise. Only then did he realize that something was wrong. He suddenly turned his head, and then he saw that a few more people had unknowingly come up to the display stage. He felt like the space on the stage that he could still stand on was filled to the brim, as if it could collapse at any time. Song Can's first thought was to protect the scene. He subconsciously shouted, "Hey, you guys!" As soon as his voice sounded, reason and a sense of danger rose from the bottom of his heart. "You guys are Madame Dollar." Song Can finally recognized one of them. He became even more flustered. He recognized Constance Doll because the gloomy and mysterious lady had often come to his observation site and the observation area of the observation site in recent years to conduct research and experiments of supernatural nature. Even if he wasn't someone from the inner world circles, he still knew how terrifying this lady was. Then he was able to distinguish that two of the people traveling with Madame Dollar were listed in the list of highly dangerous personnel. They were all big shots that he couldn't afford to offend. Sonkin broke out in a cold sweat again. He had yet to think of a way to deal with this, but then he discovered that Madame Dollar didn't plan on bickering with him at all. She just placed him in the position of an eyewitness and asked him a few questions about Luo Nan's words and actions. Of course, Sonkin said whatever he wanted to say. In the end, he couldn't help but ask himself, can we talk about something closer to the theme of the display stage? He thought too much, and his brain heated up. He couldn't help but ask the big shots in front of him, Mr. Luo Nan, did you use the display stage to anchor something? Her Majesty Empress Wu, Constance, and the Star Shaman, faintly discernible, exchanged glances. They were also observing each other's thoughts. In the end, the Star Shaman laughed and said, why do you say that? Can you sense it? Sonkin felt a bit regretful as soon as he spoke, but he couldn't control his rationality at this time. Whether it was the external pressure or the emotions in his heart, they all forced him to say what he wanted to say. Sense it? No, I didn't. Maybe it counts? I'm saying that this continuous phenomenon, which seems to deviate from the law of gravity and center of gravity, is very likely because there's something supporting or complementing it. It's right in front of us. At the very least, it can be verified with the results of observation. I'm talking about the past. Chapter 1042. Song Kan's mind was different from the disjointed description. The countless first-hand information he had collected in the observation center for over a decade flashed in his mind. The information was classified and stored according to a systematic standard. The observation center and the other relevant departments of the laboratory used this information to carry out all sorts of comparisons, experiments, and calculations. They generally described the mystical process of the interaction between space-time planes. The more he saw, the more Song can seem to possess a mystical sense. Even though many phenomena were not intuitive enough and were rather chaotic, he was still able to capture similar traces from the chaotic phenomena. He did not know whether this was experience or a supernatural ability that belonged solely to him. It's not easy to see this step. Before Song Kan, the tall and slender beauty, holding a scroll in her hand, softly praised him. Oh, this should be Her Majesty Empress Wu, an important character in this auction. Information on this person had been released during the internal briefing. She was the same as Luo Nan. She was a character that Song Kan needed to be especially careful of. Song Kan felt a mountain of pressure when facing this person. However, this person's attitude was the most genial so far. Moreover, she was the one who had proposed the idea of linking. It looked like she was an expert. Song Kan's complex thoughts aside, Her Majesty Empress Wu slowly walked toward the equipment installation area with the most severe deformation after her words of praise. She only stopped to look at a certain starting point of the tear. The others did not follow, but they more or less shifted their attention in that direction. Her Majesty Empress Wu was in the rhythm of discussing problems. Do you think that the support of the other side is solid enough? Song Kan blurted out. Didn't you say linking before? Oh, it looks like great minds think alike. Song Kan's feet felt like they were floating. Fortunately, he clenched his teeth in the end and forced himself to reply. You flatter me. Although that was what he said, the technician's emotions got to the top of his head, and he started to talk again. At present, the conditions for intersecting planes have yet to be completely satisfied. There is only an interaction similar to gravity. However, this place already possesses some directivity and even regularity. Unfortunately, I don't have the equipment on hand. I have no way of measuring the concrete data, but it's hard to imagine how it is possible to bestow this property purely by relying on manpower. Song Kan was certain that the booth and the equipment on the booth did not possess the corresponding feeling before Luo Nan arrived. Yes, Luo Nan endowed this place with an activity that was exclusive to the space and time. At least it was a sign. Tell me in detail. Not only Her Majesty Empress Wu, but Ms. Delay was also interested in having a deep conversation. This greatly satisfied Song Kan's vanity, But at this time, he saw the subtle looks in the eyes of a few researchers nearby. His brain started to work. Just now, what did he say? What he said was all sensitive information of the observation center. If he continued, it might be leaked. Speaking of which, it might have already been leaked. For a moment, Song Kim was a little confused. What should he say and what shouldn't he say? He couldn't help but fight in his heart. But before the battle was over, the expressions of the big shots in front of him all changed subtly. Looking at the direction of their gazes, it was clear that their attention had already shifted elsewhere. Song Kim felt a little stifled in his chest, but it was not just an emotional impact. His chest was indeed stuffy. It was as if the air quality in the large exhibition hall had plummeted and was extremely polluted. At this time, he heard the pale-faced man click his tongue. The smell of a lion has been getting stronger and stronger over the years. Bad breath. It's hard to avoid this after eating too many corpses. Her Majesty Empress Wu waved the scroll in her hand as if she wanted to fan away the surrounding turbid air. Then she sighed. In the end, it's all troublesome. Which one? Zhang Yingying did not see any powerful characters come over. Naturally, she cannot see them. This was because the target of the extraordinaries was at least half the length of the cruise away from the exhibition hall. That old fox Baiji, the Amaterasu court, is leaking air from all sides. I'm afraid it's about to collapse. In a certain cabin suite in Area E of the cruise ship, a rather stout black man spat out air from between his teeth. He heavily closed the notebook in his hand and tossed it onto the desk beside him. In the end, his thick palm pressed down on the notebook's already faded and frayed skin. He forcefully crushed it twice, so much so that one could hear the friction of the paper underneath. For a moment, the man even wanted to put in more effort and crush the notebook into pieces. However, even though he was Black Lion, who was famous for his fierceness, when faced with the rigorous and dense oppressive will above the abyss area, as well as the auras of the two old acquaintances that accompanied it, other than symbolically resisting it to show that he was not afraid of anyone, it was difficult for him to make any more radical moves. After all, he was fierce. He was fierce, but he was not a hothead. The kind of young lad who would easily activate extraordinaries to attack each other really did not have the slightest bit of restraint. There was also the blood demon, the 10,000 flowing flower. Fuck off. After all, when he returned to Band City, he could still see the real thing. Black Lion grinned. His dark golden teeth looked particularly ferocious in his pitch-black mouth. You come here. Black Lion hooked his finger at a black suit who was standing guard at the bedroom door. The latter was slightly startled, but quickly came forward. Black Lion roughly stuffed the notebook into the chest of the black suit and knocked it with his fist. Take this to the exhibition hall in Zone C12 and put it at the booth of Lab 70. If you meet anyone on the way and ask for it from you, just give it to them. No matter how well-trained the black suit was, he was a little dumbfounded when faced with such vague orders. Give it to anyone who wants it. Who else could this lousy notebook belong to? Halfway through his sentence, Black Lion was suddenly startled. He thought of some links that he had not considered before, but he had no intention of correcting them. Instead, with some curse-like evil thoughts, he grinned and revealed his black gold sharp teeth. Not bad, your talent. What's your name? Forget it, Toolman number 1. I'll do as you say. The black suit, no, Toolman number 1, became even more confused. He wanted to ask again, but he was simply and rudely interrupted by Black Lion. Get lost. Toolman number 1 immediately shut his mouth and turned to leave. Only then did the Black Lion get up from the overburdened chair and stretch. His thin clothes were almost about to be torn apart by his huge stomach. Black Lion was already used to this. He swaggered to the door of the bedroom and pushed it open. As an absolute VIP, the suite that Black Lion lived in was of a rather high standard. It was very spacious, and with a little tidying up, it would be fine to use it as a small exhibition hall. However, when he entered the bedroom, he suddenly felt that it was much more cramped. The reason was simple. There were too many people here, and the various connections between people were too complicated. 5 young men and women, their bodies stiff but their minds clear, were chained and placed in various positions in the room. Crisscrossing conduits extended from their bodies, forming a complex structure that resembled a spider web. In the middle of this network, Jeffrey Ells was half sitting and half lying on the luxurious bed in the room. His eyes were closed, as if he had fallen asleep. Chapter 1043. In the catheter, the dark red blood was drawn from different directions and from different people. It carried different genes and different deep-seated components. It returned to the same destination by different routes and entered a bright red sarcoma-like container where it was mixed up. At the very least, it looked like it was stirring. It transformed into a turbid gray liquid. Then it passed through the surface of the sarcoma-like surface and extended slender tentacles. It was injected into an already opened container component below. If Luo Nan was here, he would probably feel that the special equipment component below, which was folded and relaxed according to the structure of the container, looked very familiar. This was because this was the portable workbench that he had previously used to extract medicinal ingredients. Of course, it was just a similar type. The current portable workbench was much more advanced than the ordinary one that Moya had paid for. Its functions were also much more powerful. The blood drawn from different people passed through the initial smelting of the sarcoma-like container in the middle. Then it entered the portable experimental vessel for a second extraction. It passed through the relevant instruments for testing. After confirming that there was no doubt, it was injected into Jeffrey Ayres's blood vessels. The injection of these components was like injecting life force into him. Jeffrey Ayres' rapid breathing slowly calmed down. His rusty red skin also gradually returned to normal. Correspondingly, the 5 young men and women responsible for transfusing blood to him weakened at a visible speed. The rapidly proliferating feeling of fear gave additional wear to his body and mind. Some of the girls were already in tears, but no one cared about them. Old Ayres himself was in average spirits. He was extremely tired under this abnormal state. However, he still opened his eyes when Black Lion walked to the front of the bed. He stared at him calmly, maintaining the manner he should have. Black Lion revealed a mouthful of black gold teeth. This kind of vanity is meaningless. You need to sleep. Old Ayres slowly raised his hand and gently slapped his forehead. He spoke hoarsely. Another failed product. There's no need to emphasize the mistake you made. In any case, your memory function isn't reflected in this failed experimental product. Black Lion casually twisted a catheter beside him. He even used his thick finger to flick it. Right now, you could have a laboratory create another one. I heard that you recently found a collaborator. He's a gene trafficker and catalyst expert. His single cost has plummeted, right? You're talking about Luo Yuan. I don't trust him. When faced with one of his own, Old L's tone was much slower than usual. Every rise and fall of his voice seemed to require extra strength. However, this way of speaking allowed others to hear every important information in his words. Luo Yuan's ability is unique, but I don't trust the so-called ability that can't be replicated by machines, no matter how good it looks. Are you talking about me? The Black Lion grinned again. You still haven't found a machine that can replace me. Old L shook his head slightly. With the face of a strong man, he spoke the words of an old man. This is different, son. Shut up. The Black Lion changed the topic. Instead of thinking about that, why don't you think about how to appease the people in Clay's lab? Of the 6 test subjects in Group AB, if you snatch 5 of them, it would not be easy to extract enough energy from their blood to last you the entire night. Then increase it. Old L's gaze landed on the sarcoma container that was suspended in midair. Without any hesitation, he said, "Doesn't he still have Team C? 3 or 4 more should be enough. I can't just focus on Clay's side. No matter what, I have to give Mao Jingye some face. I still have a few big orders waiting for him." The Black Lion patted his belly. Speaking of which, Clay's side really put in some effort. The quality of these test subjects is very high. They're controlled at the critical point of the 2nd to 3rd phase transition. The nourishing power is unexpectedly pure and clear. It's indeed useful. Forget it. Let them prepare first. I'll go around the ship and see if there's anything more suitable. If it really doesn't work, I'll catch a few fish in the sea. It'll make do. However, Old Els was being stubborn here. No, there's no such thing as make do in my dictionary. Shut up. At your age, if you talk too much, the room will be filled with the smell of rotten apples. The Black Lion ignored Old El's request. He turned around and left the room. Old Els was not angry, at least on the surface. He only tried his best to widen his eyes and stared at the fat figure of the Black Lion as he left. The Black Lion's figure had nothing to do with being fit and tall, but Old El's gaze was fixed on him. It was as if he was looking at the most outstanding beauty and the most delicious food. The sound of the door opening and closing rang out. Old Els closed his eyes again and swallowed hard. After adjusting his breathing, he gave an order to his personal attendant. Wang Yong and Tu Ge, let them come over. Instructor Wang is already on the way. As for Mr. Tu Ge, he seems to be taking a stroll on the ship. I'll contact him now. Forget it. Let him be. Old Els retracted his order, but he quickly added another one. Get the rest of the experimental subjects over. Tell Clay that I approve of his experiment. But tonight, he's destined not to be the main character, so don't waste your effort. Yes, sir. The personal attendant knew that Old Els could not see him, but he still bowed respectfully and quickly went out to make arrangements. When the order from the Powerful's room was transmitted through the radio carrier, some people who had yet to receive the relevant information were still engaged in a dispute that had actually deviated from the main topic. Of course, as the supervisor in charge of the volunteers in Clay's laboratory, Bob, this half-bald, middle-aged white man, had completely lost his patience after being continuously harassed by several groups of people for a long time. I'll explain one last time. The reason why Team C can go on stage is because there's a problem with Team AB. According to the agreement, it's their turn. Bob spoke very frankly, but this matter could not be resolved with a frank attitude. Yuichi had already started slamming the table. If there's a problem with Team AB, how are you going to ensure the safety of Team C? In the face of an unstoppable force, being able to go on stage is the greatest safety. Bob also slammed the table. Fortunately, Smith kept mediating. Only then did he suppress his anger and say a few more words. For Smith's sake, Mr. Yuichi, I think you're lucky enough, especially your child. I suggest that after this matter, you could buy a Powerball bet. Perhaps it will create a rich asset that is not inferior to your current net worth. I've already revealed enough. I don't want to make trouble more troublesome. I only hope that everything will become simple. Now, let's act according to the contract. As Bob pressed the bell, black suits that resembled human weapons surged in and invited Yuichi and Smith out of his temporary office. Chapter 1044. Of course, Yuichi wasn't the only one who received this sort of temporary upgrade. In addition, the volunteers of Team AB had more or less their relatives accompanying them. It seemed that a wave had already arrived before them. But the men in black suits used violent methods to clear out Bob's temporary office and the corridor outside. They also effectively separated the parties involved. This sort of method was crude but effective. As for whether it was illegal or not, who cared? We can't count on Bob. I just tried to contact by Xinyan, but she didn't get through. She didn't respond to my message either. Smith glanced at the man in black, who was monitoring them, and cursed. He couldn't continue because Yuichi was staring straight at him. Yuichi's face was blue and his eyes were bloodshot. Smith had been a broker for a long time. He knew that he was facing the backlash of his clients. Even if he had a clear conscience, there was no reason to talk about this at a time like this. As for the fact that the experiment wasn't really risky, there was no need to even mention it. In the end, Yuichi was still a rational person. He knew that venting or taking out his anger was meaningless at a time like this. At this time, Yuichi's mind was also very chaotic. He even considered bringing Yu Zheng along to escape from this giant ship. Fortunately, he quickly eliminated this kind of irrational fantasy. He tried to use his rationality to find an opportunity. Is there anyone else who can contact Dr. Clay directly? It will be good to have a word with him. Convince him to change people or use fewer people. Anything is fine. As long as little Zheng can escape, the sponsorship fee is negotiable. Smith nodded and didn't say much. He operated his wristband again. Yuichi wasn't idle either. He had some connections in the New World and Luoyang City. Even if those connections weren't enough, he could still go to Xia City and ask for help. Even if it didn't have any real effect, it would be good to make Dr. Clay and his experimental team hesitate for a bit. The two men could be considered rather accomplished. They stood in a corner of the corridor and madly made phone calls. But it didn't take long for reality to tell them. There was always a gap between hopes. This was very normal. There was no need to involve specific people. As long as it was a problem related to the mutation infection, it was extremely sensitive and taboo. Not to mention, they were far away in the middle of the ocean. They were situated in an extremely delicate geographical and social environment. The Jade Light, who would easily open their mouths and make a promise upon hearing the name. The other party didn't even need to refuse. Just by saying that they wanted to understand the situation, a few hours, half a day, or even an entire night would pass. Yuchi was also a sophisticated person, so he had a basic judgment of these things. The more people he contacted, the colder his heart became. It was the same for Smith. Even if he didn't feel a chill in his heart, he felt more and more awkward standing next to Yuchi. He urgently needed to come up with a decent solution, but in the end, he could only come up with something that was better than nothing. York, I think we should start with Xinyan. Even though she rejected us, we know where she is. We can look for her directly or through her father. Didn't you say that we worked together before? Daydream? At this moment, when he said this name, he felt even more awkward, but it could also be considered path. Smith and Yuchi were stunned. They seemed to have thought of something at the same time. The former raised his voice and asked, What was it called again? Yuchi did not answer. He immediately turned around and rushed to Zone C12. Smith hurried to catch up. It was probably because the increased blood circulation stimulated his brain. He recalled the name. Luonan, right? Is he sure he's still here? Yuchi still did not speak. He just operated his wristband to confirm that he didn't have Luonan's number. He quickly switched to a different person and sent out a communication request. The target was his daughter, who was several thousand kilometers away. His mood was about to explode, but he forcefully suppressed his emotions after connecting. He became gentle and calm, even slowing down his footsteps to maintain the stability of his breathing. Chin, you're not in class, right? That's good. It's fine. Don't worry. It's fine as long as your brother torments himself. Yuchi chatted with his daughter for a bit with absolute willpower before finally getting to the main topic. Oh right, Chin. I accidentally saw someone here just now. That's right. You know him. You mentioned him before. He's a very mysterious schoolmate. Yeah, he's the one little Zheng offended. I just brushed shoulders with him and just remembered. I didn't have time to say hello. Yeah, I'm very curious as well. Why did he come here? Do you have his contact information? It's nothing. It's just too much of a coincidence to bump into him on an ocean cruise. It's good to get in touch and deepen our relationship. Dad can't miss out on such a powerful young person in Xia City. Smith spread his hands to the side. It must be said that Yuchi's ability to control his emotions was quite decent. He was unable to hear any sense of anxiety from the tone he used to converse with his daughter. But since he was going to lie, the logic behind his words wasn't tight enough. Hopefully, the other side wouldn't be able to tell. Looking at Yuchi's expression, he had indeed deceived his daughter. The problem was that Yuchi's friendship with the other side didn't seem to have reached the point of exchanging numbers. Yuchi's face was filled with unconcealable disappointment, but he quickly roused his spirits and said to the other side, This is a rare opportunity. I remember that you're friends with his relatives. Help Dad ask. Okay, send it over in a bit. The call ended, and Yuchi's brows furrowed even tighter. Smith saw the situation and said some nonsense. Let's go over there first. Maybe we'll bump into him. Yuchi didn't know what he was thinking. He was a bit absent-minded. Smith called out to him, and he woke up with a start. He tossed the little doubt that he hadn't straightened out to the back of his mind. He nodded in agreement and sped up again. Naturally, he didn't know that thousands of kilometers away, in Xia City 6 High, his daughter had already made a decision. She dialed a number that she claimed she didn't know. On the cruise ship, which was as complicated as a maze, almost everyone had their own goal, whether it was an internal drive or an external drive. Toolman number 1 accepted a strange order and found the express passageway leading to Area C. He entered an elevator that was on the way. He came out in a hurry. He didn't even wrap up the hot notebook with anything to cover it. It wasn't appropriate to hold it in his hand. In the end, he did what Black Lion did and put it in his bosom. The problem was that this notebook was really hot. That wasn't a description. Toolman number 1 was in the outer circle of the inner world. He was certain that this notebook definitely possessed some special magic. Ever since he put it in his bosom, it had been emitting heat. It was so hot that it made one's heart wrinkle. At the same time, there was a slight vibration. Of course, it was possible that this was an illusion. In any case, it was absolutely right to get rid of such a hot item as soon as possible. Up until now, there hadn't been any strange people asking him for it. He just hoped that the elevator would hurry up and enter Area C's exhibition hall so that he could put the item in its proper place. However, the elevator was for public use. It was normal for people to get on it midway. After crossing 2 floors, the elevator door opened, and a colleague, wearing the same black suit and black sunglasses, walked in. The moment the elevator door opened, the identification device came into play. It was a real colleague. The two of them didn't have any expression. They nodded as a greeting. The newcomer stood on the other side of the car, putting some distance between them. In their line of work, being careful with their words and actions was the most important thing. If it wasn't necessary, they absolutely wouldn't inquire about each other or strike up a conversation. Silence was the most reassuring atmosphere. The problem was that Toolman number 1's calm state of mind didn't last more than 2 seconds before it was broken. The elevator door closed, and the car started moving. The colleague who came in turned to him. His gaze was fixed on him through the sunglasses. "Can I take a look at the notebook in your bosom?" Chapter 1045. The colleague spoke very politely, and he had a magnetic subwoofer that made other men envious. But when these elements were combined with what he said, it made Toolman number 1's already overheated heart almost explode. "Can I?" Toolman number 1's body instinctively tensed up, and he almost got into a defensive posture. But at this moment, Black Lion's instructions flickered in his heart. "If you meet someone on the way and ask for it, just give it to them." This order dispelled all his subjective initiative. Toolman number 1 was stunned for half a second before he hurriedly took out the notebook from his chest and offered it with both hands. The colleague also politely received it with both hands. He rubbed it twice in his hands, as though he was inspecting the material. Then, he opened the notebook and flipped through it. Toolman number 1 very consciously blocked out the following scene. He looked straight ahead and only stared at the panel of the elevator, as though it contained the ultimate secret to his promotion and salary increase. The elevator continued to descend, and the colleague beside him flipped through the notebook very gently and subtly. Apart from the occasional sound of paper rubbing against each other, there was no other movement. As a result, the slight noise of the maglev elevator became especially clear. This was definitely the most difficult period of Toolman number 1's life. It was extremely long. He was already thinking about whether he should press a button midway and directly escape. Anyway, the notebook had already been given, hadn't it? However, when he had this thought, the colleague seemed to have seen through his thoughts. He still spoke gently with the magnetic subwoofer. "It won't take too long. I'll return it to you. I don't want it." No one would care about the true thoughts of a toolman. Regardless of whether the other party's attitude was firm or gentle, after this sentence, the sound of paper rubbing against each other suddenly rang out. Toolman number 1 thought that the other party had sped up the speed of flipping pages, but he didn't expect to hear a soft sigh beside him. "What's wrong?" Puzzled, he turned his head and looked at the notebook in his colleague's hands. At the same time, a voice sounded in the car again. "Flip faster. It's best to get a general idea first." Toolman number 1 was stunned. Why does this voice sound so familiar? No, why are his lips, teeth, and tongue moving? He shuddered violently. The sudden thought in his mind was like a firecracker, exploding his brain into chaos. The area below his neck was cold, as if he was numb from the cold and had lost all feeling. But no matter what, he still moved his lips and spoke clearly. "This is getting interesting. If it were me, I'd change the order of these loose leaf binders." Tool number 1's eyes were about to burst, but he couldn't see the source of the dominating power that defied his will. All he saw was that his colleague didn't even raise his head as he replied in a calm tone, "It's better to keep things as they are." Toolman number one's tongue continued to move. "When Baiji came to me, I didn't think much of it. But now, it seems like it's a waste of God's gift in your hands. Should I agree to it? Or you could just give it to me, or hand it over to my stupid disciple?" "I'm sorry, Lady Necromancer. I promised my colleague, you don't have to worry about me. Don't worry about me." Toolman number one froze on the spot. His eyes were painful and hot, and he was about to cry. He really wanted to repeat the order that Black Lion had given him, but it was difficult for him to do so. At this moment, he heard a ding. The elevator arrived. Almost at the same time, he also clearly felt his lips and teeth close. His tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, causing air to rush into his nostrils, and he let out a heavy grunt. Toolman number one's head turned forward again. It had nothing to do with his own will. He saw that the elevator doors slid open, and there were already people waiting outside. There were 5 of them, both men and women. Standing in the middle was a surprisingly young man. They didn't make way, nor did they want to enter. However, their eyes were focused on the colleague beside him. To be precise, they were looking at the notebook in the colleague's hand. Toolman number one's mind had been crushed by the continuous, invisible, dominating power. He had almost lost his ability to think normally. He could only mechanically observe and reflect the situation around him. Or perhaps he was just observing on his behalf. At this time, the colleague beside him raised his head. Through his sunglasses, he met face to face with the people outside the elevator. His hands were still in the position of flipping the pages. After half a second, he opened his mouth as calmly as usual. "Can you watch a bit longer? Do you want to watch a bit longer?" The subwoofer of the colleague and the voice of the young man in the middle of the 5 seemed to coincide together. Both sides probably didn't expect such a coincidence. The air froze for a moment, and it was still the young man who took the lead. He moved slightly to the side, making way for the outside passage. "You're here, right? Please help yourself." The colleague bowed slightly to the person outside the door. "Many thanks, Mr. Luo Nan. Nice to meet you." He walked out of the elevator in a very natural manner. Toolman number one followed him like a walking corpse. He actually observed that the gaze of the young man, Luo Nan, had a clear pause on his own face. At this time, a middle-aged man wearing a flowery shirt and shorts chuckled. "Brother Tu Gu, you dumped your boss again?" The colleague slightly raised his eyes and nodded toward the flowery shirt middle-aged man. "Hello, Mr. Blood Demon. I don't have any missions for now." Blood Demon introduced the young man, Luo Nan. "His name is Tu Gu. He's the most carefree security personnel in the world. He leaves his employer and runs all over the world. Oh, right. He's been employed by Wang Yu for many years. If there's a conflict, you must be careful of him." "Oh, is that so?" Luo Nan's gaze moved away from Toolman number one's face and turned to look at Tu Gu. Right now, he was like a young man truly driven by curiosity. Though he agreed to Tu Ji's request to borrow the notebook, he quickly walked over to Tu Ji's side. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Tu Gu, and they watched together. Of course, Luo Nan was at most 170 centimeters tall. Tu Ji's physique was robust, over 190 centimeters. There was a clear difference in height between the two. Therefore, Luo Nan simply left the ground with his toes and floated in the air. He was like a ghost floating behind Tu Ji's shoulder. Blood Demon clicked his tongue twice. This method of borrowing is passable, unlike some people. Toolman number one saw Blood Demon and the short-haired beauty turn their gazes in his direction. He subconsciously felt a bit dizzy as he faced those dim yellow and bright eyes. His mouth began to squirm again at this time, producing a sound. It's hard to say who's borrowing who. Chapter 1046. The words spoken by Death Witch, who was controlling Toolman number one, were clearly provocative. However, Luonan didn't pay any attention to her. He was still like a backstage spirit with no sense of existence. He flipped through the contents of the notebook with Tu Gu. He looked at whatever Tu Gu looked at. He had a very good temper. Forget about Death Witch. Even Blood Demon and Wan Luwa didn't expect Luo Nan to be this calm. Luo Nan who had an eccentric personality and was especially sensitive when it came to family matters, to be this sensitive. This wasn't just the case on the surface. The elevator room everyone was currently in was approximately 30 square meters. It was quite spacious on the cruise ship. However, if 5 extraordinaries or the convergence of extraordinaries' consciousnesses were included, the space would suddenly become narrow. Everyone was a highly sensitive person. Their bodies and souls formed their own domains. They were so close to each other, and their energies intertwined with each other on the mental plane. They needed to be especially careful in controlling their energies, and their minds were more or less stretched. Under these circumstances, any fluctuations on the material and mental planes, especially clear hostility and malice, could lead to a tense and even uncontrollable situation. It wasn't just the people present. The extraordinaries in the other areas of the cruise ship, and even some of the weaker mental experts, all sensed the powerful tension that suddenly converged and balanced each other. For a time, the mental space projected by the tens of thousands of living beings on the jadeite light became a bit quiet. The chanting that reverberated within grew louder and louder. It had to be said that the 2 key figures in the elevator hall were doing exceptionally well in the current situation. One was Tu Gu. He held the fatal notebook in his hand. It could be said that he was standing in the eye of the storm. But from beginning to end, whether it was when he was communicating with Death Witch in the elevator car, or when he saw Luo Nan after the elevator doors opened, he never revealed any hostile intent. The energy and blood of his body were restrained and well organized. There was not the slightest bit of sharpness. To be able to do this in an environment filled with extraordinaries was not easy. Admittedly, there was a factor in his personality, but his ability to restrain himself was truly admirable. The other person who did this extremely well was Luo Nan. No one knew why he was able to be this calm. Ripples formed from the short mantra of 16 words still reverberated within his sea of consciousness and above the abyss. They were arranged like scriptures and filled with fine smoke. They were constantly announcing the existence of his will. However, it was merely an announcement. With the passage of time, the thunderous impact from the very beginning gradually faded away, probably around the time when Black Lion sent the notebook out of the country. On the mental plane, Luo Nan's power functioned just like his own mental senses. It flowed naturally, faintly discernible. Even if there were occasional fluctuations, they did not bring about any direct pressure or threat to the sensitive extraordinaries on the ship. At most, she would think that he was too noisy, but you should at least allow a transcendent to be a little willful, right? This was the right of the strong. This peculiar sense of existence, from the initial ostentatiousness, slowly settled down until people got used to it, achieving a kind of running-in result. Moreover, Luo Nan had been able to protect these results up until now. Be it when he saw Tu Gu or when he faced the Death Witch, he maintained a certain level of stability. He completely ignored the latter's provocation. No one knew what he was thinking, at least no one could detect it. As a result, the Death Witch couldn't find a chance to act up. That was quite impressive. Blood Demon subconsciously scratched his chin. A few hours ago, he had evaluated Luo Nan, saying that the young man was quiet and didn't have any substantive ideas. He was pushed all the way to his doorstep. Now, could this be considered as a counterattack? Practically everyone in the elevator room had their own plans, but they restrained themselves. The atmosphere wasn't tense, but it was rather stiff. This elevator room was one of the fast passageways connecting areas C and D, so the flow of people was quite dense. In the eyes of the extraordinaries, such an odd atmosphere was rare and precious. However, by Xinyan, Tucker, and the others were more strained. And so on and so forth, at least 2 waves of guests had already passed through this place, and they had been scared back. Finally, Tu Gu flipped to the last page of the notebook. Just like in the elevator, he sighed softly. His fingers even flipped back a few pages, as if he wanted to read it one more time. Luo didn't stop him, but in the end, Tu Gu still closed the notebook. He turned to the side, pulling away a bit from Luo Nan, and returned the notebook with both hands. Many thanks. Luo Nan actually didn't take the notebook in the first instance. Instead, he asked, "You're not going to read it?" I can't understand it, and I can't tell it apart. Let's not read it. Luo Nin nodded. He extended his hands and took the notebook back, achieving a handover that made most people sigh in secret. A second later, Luo Nan flipped open the leather cover of the notebook. Sure enough, there were 16 words on the title page, as well as the tetrahedron and its inscribed circumscribed sphere structure. Compared to the two books Luo Nan had placed in Xia City and the two books burned by the Horned Demon, the handwriting on this page was a bit neater. There were no traces of a second erasure. He didn't flip to the back. He closed the notebook and raised his head to look at Tu Gu. I ask your opinion? Luo Nan's tone and words were extremely polite. Tu Gu couldn't find a reason to refuse. He thought seriously for a moment, but his answer was very simple. Mr. Luo Yuandao, you must have had a hard time back then. Luo Nan didn't say anything after hearing this. He just bowed slightly toward Tu Gu. Tu Gu returned the bow and said, Then I'll take my leave first. From beginning to end, these two people communicated in an exceptionally polite and courteous atmosphere. It was as if there was a special tacit understanding between the two, but it made everyone else who saw it feel like they were in the clouds. After exchanging pleasantries, Tu Gu, who said that he was about to leave, turned his gaze to Toolman number 1 and said, You're not leaving? No one knew whether the target of his conversation was with Toolman number 1 or Death Witch. The Death Shaman could roughly tell that this supernatural who floated around and wandered about without a trace was never someone who was easy to deal with. So, he ordered the Toolman to move his lips again. Now who do you think has had a hard time? Is there anyone who would actually take it seriously? Aside from clear mockery, Death Witch also stabbed at the pit of the stomach. But when these words were spoken, not only did 2G's sunglasses-covered face not change, even Luo Nin only lowered his head to look at the cover of the notebook in his hand. He didn't flip through it, but it looked like he was lost in thought. As for the others, they all knew how to play deaf and mute. For a person of status, there was nothing more embarrassing than being ignored by others. No matter how eccentric Death Witch's temperament was, he still cared about his face. He really couldn't continue to be entangled here, so he simply snorted coldly and abandoned the temporary Toolman. He plunged into the depths of the sea of consciousness and disappeared without a trace. Blood Demon and Wan Luhua, who had been seriously observing the layout of the elevator hall, glanced at each other. It was very clear that this old woman definitely bore a grudge against everyone present. Speaking of which, was there an extraordinary in this world that she didn't hate? Blood Demon didn't take this seriously. He didn't care about Toolman number 1, who had fallen limply to the ground. He reached out to pat Luo Nan's shoulder. Today, I'm going to have a whole new level of respect for you. The latter half of Blood Demon's words came to an abrupt halt. Blood Demon awkwardly watched as his palm directly embedded itself into Luo Nan's shoulder. This caused Luo Nan's water vapor body, which wasn't very translucent, to turn half illusory. It looked like it could dissipate into nothingness at any moment. Chapter 1047. In the exhibition hall, everyone was discussing the hook Luo Nan left behind. They were guessing the subsequent developments and changes. It was a very deep and interesting matter. However, the brief confrontation in the elevator hall not far away more or less caught people's attention. For normal people, the Jade Light was a city on the sea. The space was vast, and the content was rich. One might not be able to finish playing it in a week or two. However, for existences on the level of extraordinaries, this giant steel ship was basically no different from a small dinghy when they clashed and fought with each other. There was practically no buffer, especially for the mental side. Plus, everyone had their own standpoints. The scene of a chaotic battle was enough to make one's scalp ache. As his thoughts changed subtly, the discussion could be postponed for the time being. Constance and the Star Shaman bade farewell to Her Majesty Empress Wu and left together. Star Shaman walked away from Her Majesty Empress Wu's line of sight, and his footsteps clearly sped up. Constance followed without batting an eyelid. Her gaze was slightly lowered as she watched Star Shaman's fingers twitch unconsciously as he walked. She frowned, but she did not say anything in the end. Constance did not speak. Her consciousness reverberated on the mental plane. It was Death Shaman, who had just finished his confrontation with Luo Nan. Everyone was very familiar with each other, so there were no pleasantries. Death Shaman went straight to the point. The notebook is indeed valuable. At the very least, there is perceptible, metaphysical information sealed within. That bastard by G. He just wants the world to be in chaos. Constance was a bit puzzled. Luo Nan seems to have gotten the news a bit too early. Bai Ji is looking for external help all over the world. He might be deliberately leaking information. How big is this circle? There are more than one or two blabbermouths. Death Shaman did not like wasting time on such boring matters. He was a bit impatient. Are you done yet? Immediately, Star Shaman finally joined in. His teacher's powerful consciousness gave him a lot of pressure, even for an extraordinary like him. To reach a state of coordination and sharing required considerable skill, patience, and trust. Although it was said to be immediately, it had to wait until the two extraordinaries carried Death Shaman's drifting consciousness back to their own rooms. Only then did they truly reach a state of perfect coordination. Star Shaman did not delay any further. His right hand directly drew in the virtual workspace, reproducing the chaotic lines, words, and graphics that Death Shaman had seen in the notebook. Obviously, this was controlled by the Death Witch's consciousness. But now, no one cared about these minor details. The three extraordinary consciousnesses were all focused on these simple yet messy handwriting, attempting to rearrange and deal with them. But how could it be that easy? Constance was one of the top spirit formation masters in the world, and he had a deep understanding of ancient and modern runes and symbols. However, he was still at a loss as to what to do with the runes before him. Who knew what these messy words and images were pointing to? There wasn't even a direction. This is an observation record, the Death Wizard suddenly said. Teacher, you mean, I don't know what the object of observation is, but the writer of this notebook tried to describe it, but he was unable to do so, resulting in a terrible physical and psychological state. The Death Wizard's consciousness continued to flow, like a breeze coming from an unknown place in the cabin, seeping into the muscles and bones. By directly touching that notebook, I can sense chaotic and restless power, despair, and stubbornness. Different sources, but they've been twisted together to form an unrecognizable monster. However, it was sealed by the words and graphics on the title page. Constance and the Star Sorcerer exchanged glances, but there was no doubt. The Death Wizard was publicly recognized as the most authoritative shaman in the world. She could go back in time and foresee things. Her judgment, be it evidence or intuition, was very persuasive and had the power to guide others. Of course, Constance and the Star Sorcerer were transcendents with great confidence, so they wouldn't believe whatever the Death Wizard said. But this kind of explanation was a direction, right? Following this train of thought, the Star Sorcerer tried to think in a relatively reasonable direction. There's no order to the pages in the notebook, and there's no pattern. From a single page, it doesn't seem like a direct depiction, or at least not a mechanical copy. Otherwise, there should be a simpler method and a clearer visual impression. Then, Constance understood what he meant. Then it's very likely an object that can't be described directly or a target with mental pressure. Just like what many religious texts say, do not look directly at God. None of the three transcendents present believed in the so-called gods, so they naturally replaced the words with a powerful, unknown existence. Perhaps this was still a fantasy, but at least this train of thought could continue. The Death Wizard took the initiative to lead the conversation. It could be a living thing, or it could be a series of more complicated and strange things. No matter what, it would be a very strenuous task to depict it with Luo Yuandao's abilities and methods at the time. He obviously couldn't use any equipment. He had to first observe and understand it, then record it in a way that allowed for practical use. He could only rely on his brain and hands. Sometimes he succeeds, and sometimes he fails. And these, as well as the scattered scribbles on the notebook, are the accumulation of the results of his failures. The Star Sorcerer's arm twitched, and the virtual workspace was destroyed. Clearly, this wasn't his own will. The Death Wizard never wasted her energy on meaningless things. Her time and energy were too precious. Recovering from the results of a failed observation is something impossible. What's left on the notebook are fragments that have been clumsily translated, lost most of the information, and reduced dimensions. And the value lies in the fact that they actually exist. Constance always found something positive. This is that lunatic Luo Yuandao, right? That's the value of his existence. The Death Wizard's thoughts became more and more erratic. At the very least, he saw a world that we couldn't see. He touched upon a level that he shouldn't have touched upon. He left behind bits and pieces. Unfortunately, they're all trash that can't be recovered. And this is probably one of the reasons why he's able to survive until now. The Star Sorcerer ran through the information regarding Luo Yuandao in his mind. So, is this the reason why he went crazy? The Death Wizard's thoughts laughed. He forcefully accommodates things that cannot be digested. He chases after treasures that he doesn't have the qualifications to possess. He doesn't know that this thing will break his stomach when it enters his digestive system. When it enters his thinking system, it will burn his brain. In a certain sense, he really has it hard. The Star Sorcerer grabbed his right wrist and loosened it a bit. That treasure is with Luonan right now? Yes, this connects to the current hot topic. Luonan? The Death Wizard muttered to herself for a moment before sneering. He will have it harder in the future, if there's a future. Chapter 1048. Onheim Mental Sanatorium was currently at its most leisurely time of the day. Ward rounds, dressing changes, diagnosis, and treatment had all been carried out. The patients and elderly who had been recuperating here walked out of their rooms one after another. They took a walk outside and breathed in the fresh air. It would be even more perfect if the thick clouds in the sky could be wiped away at this time, allowing the occasional sunlight to pass through to be less stingy. Recently, Luo Yuandao's physical condition had been maintained quite well. As the weather warmed up, he had already resumed outdoor activities under the close care of the special nurse. Moreover, with Xiao Xinyu's company, his smile had become much more cheerful. Today was no exception. This kept Dr. Zhang Yuliang, Octopus, in a good mood. He had been paying attention to the situation through the monitor. He brewed a cup of coffee for himself and offered a toast to the brain cells that had been sacrificed because of last night's all-nighter. How about I go out for a stroll too? Just as he was thinking, the hexa ear in his ear vibrated slightly. It projected a message through his retina. The sender of the message was the Psychic Wave Network maintenance team of the Xia City branch. Ouyang Chun signed and stamped it. It was a warning directed at the core members of the Xia City branch and the elite operations team. Currently, the abyssal region of the Psychic Wave Network corresponds to the level of the abyssal region. A continuous and irregular force has appeared. The fluctuating range is between 0, 3 dg and 12, 5 dg. The source of the force has yet to be discovered. To ensure the safety of the branch members and the city's ability users, the interference ports of the Psychic Wave Network will be temporarily shut down. The Fortress of the Ring of Blood and Will in the abyssal region. It is recommended that before the alarm is lifted, all activities that may touch upon the abyssal region and even the depths of the spiritual sea are suspended. To all personnel who have received this notice, please immediately enter Level 1, Standby Mode, and activate your coordinates. If you feel any physical or mental discomfort, please immediately contact the branch laboratory. What did this mean? Octopus was also psychic, but he was a bit confused when he saw this notice. He didn't understand half of it. He quickly logged into the main page and forums of the Psychic Wave Network, but he saw that it was still calm and tranquil. There was only a maintenance and temporary shutdown notice that was lightly worded and did not involve the abyssal region's movements. He rummaged through several word channels and chat groups of the Xia City branch. Probably because the core information was limited, there weren't many people in the know. No effective discussion was formed. Most of the people in the know were as confused as he was. A call came in while he was confused. It was Bamboo Pole. When the call connected, the person on the other side asked, "Are you all right?" Octopus knew that Bamboo Pole wasn't just asking about him. so he wasn't in a hurry to answer. Instead, he carefully observed the surveillance footage before saying, "Everything is normal. What's going on? I'm not sure yet. I'm at the Shangbing building right now. The president is leading the investigation." The octopus asked again. The force exceeded 10 standard units. "Is there an extraordinary attacking us?" "There's no conclusion at the moment, at least not yet, but we've basically ruled out the malfunction of the sensor equipment. That's because basically the mental side of B class and above will show varying degrees of reaction." Bamboo Pole was also a grade B psychic, which meant that he had also felt it. Other than that, Elder Yu, Mr. Bai, and Gao Tianshi, the three psychics had the strongest reaction. Of course, there's also President Ouyang. At this point, Bamboo Pole seemed to be talking to someone. After about half a minute, he spoke again. "Now, we have a preliminary estimate. It might be an unknown powerhouse, definitely at the extraordinary level. It might be a famous expert, or it might be a mutant species from the wilderness that is currently extending its consciousness into this place." The octopus subconsciously responded, "A war. Right now, it's just tossing and turning on a mental plane, but it's always searching for an entry point to the material plane. It's tried many times, but it's not satisfied. It seems to be an obsessive-compulsive disorder." This is what the president said. The octopus chuckled twice. "I wonder who it is." At the very least, President Ouyang feels that it's unfamiliar. There's no corresponding data in the database. From the looks of it, it's more likely that it's an unknown mutant species. It might even be classified as a Darksider species. Like the human-faced arachnid. Don't jinx it. Bamboo Pole still had lingering fears from the chaos of Xia City back then. An extraordinary level Darksider species. I didn't say it. You said it. The two habitually bickered for a bit, but Bamboo Pole quickly returned to the main topic. In short, be careful in everything. Tonight is extremely sensitive. It wouldn't be strange for anything to happen. I don't need to emphasize this. In a moment, Mr. Ba will go over there. If there's anything, you guys can discuss it. Keep in touch and report in time. In addition, President Ouyang suggests that no matter who it is, reduce outdoor activities. He feels that the cloud layer above his head is quite awkward. F***ck me. The octopus jumped in fright. He raised his head to look at the monitor screen. Luo Yuandao and Xiao Xinyu were currently slowly moving about on a soft and flat grassland. Luo Yuandao, who was practically a bag of bones, made a rare large movement. He stretched his body. During this movement, his head, which was tilted upwards, became fixed. He still had his hands on his waist, but he no longer swung his neck. Instead, he stared blankly at the thick layer of clouds in the sky. It was approximately 10:30 in the morning right now. Although there were thick clouds in the sky that blocked most of the sun's rays, it was still cloudy and not overcast. The sun's rays dazzled the edges of the cloud layer with layers of gold. A normal person would not be able to stare directly at the sky for too long before they would tear up from the stimulation of the sunlight. Looking at the sky for too long was definitely not a good thing. Luo Yuandao was even worse than a normal person. There's something going on over at the old man's side. I'll go take a look. Octopus didn't have time to say anything more to Bamboo Pole. He rushed out the door in 2 or 3 steps and ran toward the grassland. Fortunately, he had made arrangements beforehand. He had special nurse Hong, who took care of Luo Yuandao, come to the area in front of his office whenever he accompanied the old man out for a stroll. They were so close that if anything happened, she would be there in a matter of minutes. When Octopus rushed to Luo Yuandao's side, the latter was still maintaining his posture of looking straight at the sky. All right, the old man's eyes were closed. It was probably because of this situation that Xiao Xinyu, who was already by Luo Yuandao's side, frowned but did not try to dissuade him. Or perhaps he did dissuade him, but it had no effect at all. However, what did that extremely focused and serious look mean? Unexpectedly, when Octopus jogged over, Luo Yuandao suddenly said, "Zhongheng, you've come at the right time. It's been a long time since I've had such a neat and tidy impression." Quack. Octopus was stunned. He subconsciously looked at Xiao Xinyu. The latter did not say anything and only shook his head slightly. On the other side, Luo Yuandao continued. Qingwen's train of thought is clearer than ours. I've also benefited greatly from her adjustment this time. Later on, Luo Yuandao said some unclear words, involving some unfamiliar names, professional terms, and so on. In the end, he said, I'll do my best to use Qingwen's method to repeat it once. You remember it too. Let's first study it and see if we can piece together an outline, to piece together the appearance of a deity. Chapter 1049. It seemed that he had accidentally touched upon some secrets of the past. Octopus was quite conflicted right now. If he listened, he might violate the privacy of the Luo family. If he didn't listen, this opportunity would never come again. And Luo Nen wasn't here. Having dealt with Luo Nan for a long time, Octopus obviously knew that this kid knew very little about the past of his grandfather and father, especially the past events in the wilderness. However, he was extremely thirsty. It would be hard to explain if Luo Nen were to ask about this matter in detail. As a friend, should he listen? Or shouldn't he? Octopus's conflicted thoughts wouldn't affect the outside world. However, Luo Yuandao didn't say too much after that. His eyes were still closed, but his demeanor was as if he was observing with rapt attention. In the end, he even slowly raised his arm. It was as if he wanted to grab the clouds in the sky. It was as if he wanted to welcome the dazzling sunlight behind the clouds. In the end, he wasn't able to grab anything. Instead, the excessively withered palm seemed like it would turn into smoke at any time under the sunlight that permeated through the clouds, melting into the shadows of the clouds. The old man's stiff fingers trembled uncontrollably at the front end of this arm. He was gesturing with lines that had no basic logic or concrete shape. However, perhaps in his own circle of thinking, he was doing meaningful work. So gradually, a smile actually appeared on the old man's face, and it grew more and more brilliant. Luo Nen quietly gazed at the shadow of the clouds, at the old man who was so withered that he was out of shape. The palm that was pointing at the sky seemed to be pointing at his chest. Of course, he also saw the old man smile. Though the old man's eyes were closed, and he wasn't pointing at anything, this was probably the most amiable grandfather had shown him in recent years when the grandfather and grandson met face to face. Right now, Luo Nan's thoughts were entrusted to the clouds that covered the skies of Xia City. They were concentrated on the sanatorium. Xia City was the area that Luo Nan had the strongest control over. There were far too many people here that he needed to pay attention to and protect at all times. Therefore, the Mother Micah and the Soul Cloak supported each other, accumulating and replenishing each other. From last night until now, Xia City hadn't been clear. The accumulated water vapor transformed into a thick mass of clouds. They gradually piled up to form the structure of the Mother Micah, covering the entire city. Then Luo Nan's thoughts jumped and began to directly interfere with the covered area. With Luo Nan's pure sensing ability, there was no need to be this high profile. However, his current state of mind was not stable enough. Luo Nen was able to unearth many things through his contact with the original notebook. He could understand the meaning behind the symbols, words, and even the messy lines. This did not mean that he could recover the person recorded in the notebook and decipher his grandfather's thoughts. He had only truly touched the chaotic spiritual light left on the ordinary page under the suppression of the 16 words formula and the visualization diagram, as well as the remnant emotions of extreme pain. Luo Nen could confirm that his grandfather didn't possess supernatural powers. But where did the spiritual light on those pages come from? Even after more than 10 years, it still made its existence known to him. Luo Nen was no longer a greenhorn. He had gone through all sorts of experiences and studies during this period of time. He already possessed the ability to judge and deduce from small clues. He seemed to be able to see the cause and effect of all of this. In just a few minutes of reading the notes, he had already constructed a preliminary model. A powerful source of energy and information had penetrated the frail framework of an ordinary person's body and soul, leaving behind an imprint on the similarly frail page. Within the split-page notebook, the chaotic strokes of the strokes weren't just simple ink and paint. They were the scorch marks of the writer's soul burning. Luo Nan was certain that his grandfather wasn't just a simple recipient when the source of radiation penetrated. That old man was clearly recording, controlling, and expressing something. Of course, the current notebook was a collection of the results of failure. There were no achievements to be seen. There was only fragmentation and pain. But in another sense, this was the result of the source of radiation penetrating the frame of the old man's body and soul. It had the smallest deformation and the most retained results. What was the source of radiation? Where was it? How did it arrive or connect? Those fellows who could understand, or at least partially, were probably researching and considering this question. In the past, no one cared about formatting theory. When the archetype format was at its zenith, there probably weren't many people who cared about this sort of thing. These notebooks that recorded the failures and sealed errors were sealed in the depths of a laboratory, never to see the light of day. But now, the situation was completely different. Clearly, this was largely due to Luo Nan. Those fellows thought of every possible way to dig out the source of Luo Nan's power, especially the location of the new plane. Perhaps they had bound all of Luo Nan's achievements to date to the unknown resources at the core of the new plane. Needless to say, Luo Nan thought the same. The only difference was that those fellows were thinking of the new plane, while Luo Nan was thinking of the Sunwheel Hell. There was no way around it. This was his first reaction. Luo Nan had long since known what his grandfather and parents were concentrating on, observing and researching. It was the mist maze. It was the mysterious existence of the Sunwheel Hell in the depths of the mist maze that could not be effectively explained to this day. His mother's North Coast gear had opened the door to the cloud world. That place was the product of the collision between the mist maze and Earth's local space-time. His father's tree hole was formed for the purpose of observing the mist maze and ultimately pointed towards the Sunwheel Hell. As for his grandfather, although the scope of his research seemed to be the transformation of the frame of the human body and soul, he was without a doubt the leader of this line of research. There were most likely no problems if Luo Nan thought in this direction. Luo Nan was able to make a simple analysis. The mist maze, the shattered fragments of space-time, and the domain couldn't form the burden and radiation of a large amount of information without extraordinary power or special equipment to integrate and analyze them. The Sunwheel Hell was different. After all, Luo Nan had truly experienced the impact of the destructive flood of information for himself. Not just once. Was this the truth? Luo Nan didn't know. Actually, the key thing that was pressing against Luo Nan's chest, twisting his skull, and making his mind absent-minded wasn't this. What occupied most of his brain's resources was another matter. Luo Nan was suddenly enlightened because of this split-page notebook. His grandfather's so-called schizophrenia turned out to be due to another reason. It wasn't a neurological disease in the traditional sense. Instead, it was damage from external sources of radiation. New discoveries always brought new thoughts. Luo Nan thought, maybe I can do something? This thought germinated and couldn't be restrained. Therefore, Luo Nan hurriedly changed his thoughts and headed straight for Xia City. Luo Nan came with a certain amount of hope. His rich experiences and leaps and bounds of progress gave him a certain degree of confidence. After all, he was already publicly recognized as a psychic expert. He had established a profound structure of the mental domain that ordinary people couldn't even imagine. He could spread a global network, control the mind, and communicate, and trace back to precognition. There was also the mica structure that he had just established. He specialized in dissection and analysis. But reality gave him a beating. Reality was that he couldn't see through it. It wasn't that the old man's current frame of body and soul had some sort of powerful concealment ability that could block Luo Nan's probing senses. The core problem was complexity, chaos, and fragility. The frame structure of the old man's body and soul had already reached the point of collapse with a single touch. Luo Nan's consciousness poured here, stirring the winds and clouds, drawing the starry sky, causing wave after wave of ripples in the sea of consciousness and the polar domain of the abyssal region. But here, on the lawn of this sanatorium, Faced with this fragile soul that would shatter with a single poke, Luo Nan could only step back and not move forward. He was helpless. So Luo Nan knew that even if he amassed the apex power of Earth and used the living starry sky structure that he was most proficient in, or the mica structure that he had just obtained, it would still be difficult to make a move. Making a move required the awareness of a destructive dismantling. That was a consequence that Luo Nan simply couldn't bear. Unfortunately, because of his meaningless actions just now, he was able to pry a step further into the ominous shadow that drew closer behind the old man. The aura of death. Luo Nan was no longer a child who had never seen the world. His rich experiences during this period of time could instantly kill 99% of the normal humans in this world. It wasn't that he had never seen a life state worse than Luo Yuandao's. Some of them were even created by him. But how could that be the same? Luo Nan was able to clearly distinguish in his mind that this was a kind of selfish way of thinking. His rationality had always been in play, allowing him to suppress the sudden eruption of irritability, depression, gloom, and all sorts of other negative emotions from the great ups and downs in his heart. But that was all there was to it. Luo Nan gazed at the withered and shriveled old man on the lawn. He gazed at the frail structure of body and soul that could no longer be further explored or stripped away. All sorts of thoughts and ideas rose and fell in his mind, but it was hard for him to grasp any valuable fragments for a time. The only thing that could be said to be comforting right now was the old man's observation with his eyes closed. Luo Nan knew that the old man wasn't looking at the layer of clouds. He didn't discover any structure within a layer of clouds. The layer of clouds was at most an inducement. Even the existence and tendency of Luo Nan's consciousness was a part of the inducement. The main activity of the old man's consciousness at this stage was still limited within his self-logical circle. The external world was merely the background that rotated on the stage of his consciousness. He was still within his own demarcated circle. It was just that this time, the old man was no longer an omnipotent God who could do everything. Instead, he had returned to the most profound life of the past. He continued to struggle. His trembling and deformed fingertips drew. These were the strokes that he poured his heart's blood into. He used this to communicate with his children, his students, and his colleagues. There were no obstructions. So even though the sun gradually faded from the sky and the dense clouds prevented rain, the smile on his face still grew brighter and brighter. Luo Nan gazed at this scene in a daze. His mind was in a trance. Chapter 1050. If the old man's smile and current state could be sustained for a long time, Luo Nan's mentality might be more conservative. He might place more of his thoughts in the direction of how to create a similar environment. But that was not the case. Luo Yuandao's stamina and energy were simply not enough to support such a state. After standing alone on the lawn for less than a minute, his body began to sway. Octopus and Nurse Hong rushed over to support him, which directly interfered with the old man's self-logic. He began to struggle, and his emotions began to fluctuate again, becoming irritable. Under Luo Nan's gaze, the frail structure of the old man's body and soul entered a terrible state of chaos after a short few dozen seconds of peace and harmony. In fact, he was even weaker than before. The lawn also began to become chaotic. Octopus and Nurse Hong tried to put the old man into the wheelchair. The old man continued to struggle. During this time, he opened his eyes. His turbid and hazy vision, after drifting for a few degrees, locked onto the thick clouds in the sky. Occasionally, he would flip his palms up and try his best to reach upwards. At this moment, no matter how constrained Luo Nan's thoughts were, he could still understand. The old man's self-logic formed a link with the clouds in the sky, bestowing a certain peculiar value to it. Perhaps this was the moment when the grandfather and grandson were most connected in over a decade. The problem was that this might not lead to a good result. Muffled rolls of thunder clearly rang in the sky, but Luo Nan's mind escaped during this time. Let's put it this way for the time being. He completed a great switch between Xia City and the Central Pacific Ocean. Due to the shift in focus, The water vapor fake body that had dissipated for a moment on the cruise ship solidified again. Plus, Blood Demon reacted very quickly. His body control ability was astonishing. Even though everyone knew that Luo Nan's soul had left his body a bit, the awkward situation didn't last too long. And at this time, Zhang Yingying's chain of calls helped Luo Nan out of his predicament. The signal came from Xia City, and it chased Luo Nan all the way here. Luo Ui, you've gone too far. The moment the call connected, Zhang Yingying opened her mouth and scolded. You do whatever you want. It's fine if you don't follow the plan, but why can't you contact me at all when you're looking for someone? Did I? Luo Nan's mind was still a bit absent-minded. Zhang Yingying's energetic voice sounded righteous. Didn't your communicator explode? Either the line is busy or you're not picking up. I can't tell that you're quite busy. Except for who else is coming to harass me? Luo Nan retorted in passing. He absorbed a bit of strength from the other side in passing, allowing his mood to calm down a bit. It was also because of Zhang Yingying's reminder that he also split off a portion of his consciousness and swept it over the North Bank's underground laboratory that was several thousand kilometers away. Luo Nan's various communication tools were perfectly placed there. They were originally meant to confuse the enemy, but right now they were just serving as a signal relay station. The only advantage was that he could log into a large local area network like the Psychic Wave Network, which had limited coverage without any problems. He could Psychic Network Soul Network, but he was limited range network. Luo, Soul Luo Nan. Luo Nan sighed. He gradually reduced the hybrid structure of his soul cloak and mica, interfering with the material plane of Xia City. This could be considered as tidying up the mess left behind by his sudden escape. Hopefully, President Ouyang and the others would not work overtime because of this. Aside from this, Luo Nan also saw Zhang Yingying's so-called exploding phone calls. Actually, there were only 2 or 3 of them. As for the other 2, while she was distracted, Zhang Yingying asked again, Then Yuan Wai, have you had enough harassment, or have you been harassed enough? Zhang Yingying asked, Are you done harassing or being harassed? Give me a definite message. There's still 4 or 5 hours until the auction starts. Have you arranged any programs? Programs? Luo Nan's gaze subconsciously swept across Blood Demon and Wan Liuhua's faces. He had no intention of asking. Even if there were programs, he wouldn't be interested in participating, let alone programs. No, I can't do this. Luo Nan's mind tightened. He quickly denied his previous state of mind. If he became distracted, lost in thought because of a notebook, then wouldn't he be exposing his weakness to others? In the end, Luo Nan had learned a few things when it came to interpersonal communication and scheming. Perhaps it was very difficult to do it perfectly. Perhaps it wasn't worth mentioning in the eyes of experts, but he still needed to improve through experience. If he improved a little, then the enemy would misjudge a little. Wouldn't that be the case? Luo Nan calmed the churning thoughts in his mind once more. He redistributed his consciousness to various spatial directions. He needed to be a bit more in front of people, especially in the jadeite light. It would be best if a situation like Blood Demon's palm smashing into his shoulder blade didn't happen again. Luo Nan's thoughts flowed. It only took a second or two for Luo Nan to laugh. I can ask about programs, but I don't have any. I do. Can I find some fun on such a large ship? Luo Nan's laughter was abrupt. In truth, it was a bit terrifying. Zhang Yingying was stunned for a moment. She didn't respond immediately. Luo Nan temporarily stopped this topic. Your line is busy. I'll make another call. Contact me later. Luo Nan didn't do as Zhang Yingying said and immediately made a call. Instead, he turned to look at the person in the elevator who needed his attention the most. Tu Gu, the bodyguard-like extraordinary, was still lingering in the elevator. The direct reason for this was the tool that came with him. This person was possessed and controlled by the necromancer. It consumed a lot of energy. Tu Gu spent quite a bit of effort to give this colleague the strength to stand up. Luo Nan asked, Do you want to have afternoon tea together? Tu Ji's attitude was still restrained and polite. It's okay. I took the liberty to disturb you. I hope you can forgive me. He didn't say anything more. He gave Luo Nin a nod and supported his tool colleague. They walked back into the elevator and left. Luo Nin only turned his attention back after the elevator closed and went up. Blood Demon slapped Luo Nan's back again at this time. This time, both the slap and the reception were done quite perfectly. This fellow, too good, isn't simple, right? Yes. He's very strong. He's very organized. Huh? Blood Demon was stunned for a moment. He soon laughed. Brother Luo, your comments are quite unique. Luo Nin laughed. He didn't speak in detail. He thought for a moment, found a number, and dialed back. Hello, Sister Pomegranate. He was calling his cousin, Emo Han. She was also one of the two people who had called just now. Emo Han was clearly in class. She picked up quickly and spoke in a low voice. Luo Nin could still hear the unhappiness in her tone. You're back from playing around? Don't look for me. It's Yuqin looking for you. It looks like it's quite urgent. Luo Nin immediately understood. Yuqin's call must have gone unanswered. She was worried that Luo Nin wasn't picking up on purpose, so she asked for Emo Han's help. Aside from being urgent, this method of doing things was excessively careful. It showed that Yuqin held more reverence towards Luo Nan. However, there were certainly many twists and turns involved to be able to force Yuqin to this point. Luo Nin didn't hope to understand everything in an instant. He also didn't want to waste his brain. He gave Emo Han a few vague grunts and hung up the phone. Luo Nin thought of an old acquaintance of Xia City who he had met on the same cruise ship not too long ago. That person was Yuqin's father. What was his name again? Chapter 10:51. Luo Nin wanted to immediately call Yuqin, but he turned to glance at Blood Demon and the others. They were still waiting idly by the elevator. His mind stirred, and he nodded in that direction. My classmate is looking for me. It's probably a bit of a private matter. He paused here and said, Actually, you two don't need to keep me company. Isn't Tucker and Dr. Bai always following me? Bai Xinyan was fine, but Tucker's eyes were wide open. His words were stuck in his throat. Why am I always following you? Tucker's expression was rich, but the problem was that no one paid attention to him. Blood Demon and Wan Luhua looked at each other. We're being ignored. Okay, this is a joke. In fact, they could feel that Luo Nan's words were unclear, but they were exceptionally clear about his purpose. It seemed that this fellow wanted to do something, the kind that would look for trouble. Yes, they could see that Luo Nan was still young. Perhaps he felt that it wasn't good to lose face in the face of complicated interpersonal relationships, or perhaps he instinctively rejected the tyrannical behavior of bullying the weak. In short, the two extraordinaries, who could suppress the vast majority of variables, had become burdens. The two extraordinaries were unable to fully understand Luo Nan's mental journey for a while. However, they were all intelligent people, so they didn't need to speak too bluntly. A large part of the reason why they kept following Luo Nan was because they were worried that Luo Nan would directly clash with the extraordinaries on the Jadeite Light ship. It might even escalate, adding variables to their future plans. Right now, the most troublesome few people had either directly or indirectly met face-to-face. The possibility of a direct conflict or a violent conflict was already very small. Luo Nan's current state had absolutely no problems with his personal safety. That's fine. I need to go take care of some things. Wan Luo had been called over by Blood Demon at the last minute. As a high-level member of the Eye of Secret Deeds, there were quite a few matters that needed to be taken care of before entering this huge maelstrom. Wan Luo did things in a straightforward manner. Since she had spoken, she didn't stay any longer. She entered the elevator, turned around, and smiled at Luo Nan. Call me anytime if you need anything. Luo Nan bowed in thanks. Seeing the elevator door close, Blood Demon impatiently clicked his tongue twice. Your luck with women is quite good. Don't look at this master style, smiling all the way here. He's usually a fierce character. Luo Nan ignored these senseless words. He just asked, What about you, Mr. Blood Demon? What are your plans? Blood Demon, who was despised again, was still smiling happily. Actually, I hired you to be my artist today. I didn't expect that we would get along so well, and many of the drawings went beyond the scope. Some words came out of the Blood Demon's mouth, but the meaning was the same. I originally wanted to bring you to experience a few small circles, but since you have your own ideas, I can't force you. Since I've already said it, I have to do something about it. How about this? I'll make the arrangements and see if I can find a few who don't look so repulsive. I'll call you later. Okay. Luo Nin answered in a straightforward manner. Why isn't there any sincerity? Didn't you agree? This is a bad omen. The blood demon chuckled and said no more. Without using the elevator, he turned around and left with a smile on his face. In this way, only Luo Nan, Tucker, and Bai Xinyan were left in the elevator. From the beginning to the end, no one asked for their opinion. Bai Xinyan was calm and collected. In comparison, Tucker was a little impatient. Yes, perhaps it was because he had lost 2 Nemesis characters in a row, but he was finally able to breathe. His courage grew when he was angry. After hesitating for a moment, Tucker finally asked the question. Ro, what do you want me to do? He emphasized the word I and blurred out the words Uncle Luo at the same time. Luonin didn't mind. He just laughed. Be a bodyguard. Since when am I a bodyguard? Aren't you? Then let's be clear about it. Tucker was speechless for a time. Clearly, Luonin wasn't going to reason with him. He could only blame Blood Demon for his terrible demonstration. Luonin really did have a plan for using Tucker. He had a plan on the plane, forming a basic train of thought. It was just that the details were not clear. The main thing was that Luonan's previous experience might not be useful. In any case, there were still a few hours left. This fellow looked like he had rough skin and thick flesh. He should be able to endure being tossed around. Luonan had a plan in mind, so he no longer paid attention to Tucker. He had to take care of some miscellaneous matters before doing proper business. He activated his wristband from several thousand kilometers away and contacted Yuqin. The call was answered in an instant. Mr. Luo. They were classmates and alumni. This form of address was far too polite. It was a deformed beginning. It was hard to avoid awkwardness later on. Yuqin wanted peace of mind. Fortunately, they were gradually getting used to it. My father asked for your number just now, Mr. Luo. I didn't tell him directly. Yuqin's words were polite, but she went straight to the point. She really wasn't in the mood to engage in small talk. I think that he might have encountered some trouble. His mind is uneasy. Otherwise, he would have remembered that he contacted you through me at the end of last year. Oh, something like that happened. Luonin nodded. He remembered this detail as well. At the same time, he felt that the nickname Xian, that the doll gave Yuqin couldn't be more appropriate. She always had an intelligent and calm personality. My father is currently on the Jadeite Light. He said that he saw you not too long ago. Yes, that's right. Yuqin didn't ask why Luo Nan was there. Of course, she didn't say that Mo Han still believed that Luo Nan was still in closed-door training in Xia City's laboratory. She just asked politely and carefully, my father definitely needs help, but that place isn't like Xia City. Mr. Luo, can I give him your number? Sure. Since Luo Nan had returned the call, he had made preparations in this regard. He agreed quite straightforwardly. Yuqin considered things a bit more. When asking for help, she needed to explain the sequence of events as clearly as possible. Only then would she not be embarrassed and even cause misunderstandings. She carefully considered her words and did her best to tell Luo Nan everything she knew. My father and my brother are together. They are here to treat the problem of an infection. Yuqin's tongue was nimble. She explained the sequence of events clearly with just a few words. Of course, there were some details that she couldn't grasp. Luo Nan didn't mind because he had already grasped the keywords. Clay's laboratory. Luo Nan's gaze turned to Bai Xinyan. She could be considered half the main character. He grinned and comforted Yuqin. I understand. You don't need to worry. I will understand the specifics of the situation from Uncle. Okay. Otherwise, you can give me Uncle's number. It's the same. Luo Nan's attitude was very polite. He didn't deliberately put on airs. Yuqin clearly let out a breath of relief. She said that she would immediately transfer Luo Nan's number to her father and let him get in touch with Luo Nan. The call ended quickly and efficiently. Luo Nan quite approved of the other side's attitude. He thought about how he would have to call in a bit, so he simply stopped in the elevator and turned his gaze to Bai Xinyan. What kind of demonic moth are you guys up to now? Bai Xinyan looked a bit surprised. You're talking about Yu Qi's son, right? That young man is in Team C. He's a different kind of VIP. No matter how much the laboratory tosses and turns, it wouldn't cause trouble for its future customer. Luonin coughed. Start from the beginning. He looked at Bai Xinyan up and down. I found it strange just now. Yu Qin's brother, his name is Yu Zheng, right? He was infected in Xia City. How'd he hook up with you guys across the Pacific Ocean? Oh, the course of the disease isn't right. He was infected at the beginning of the year. It's been almost half a year. If he hasn't been cured by now, then he should be in the severe third stage. Bai Xinyan pursed her lips into a smile. This involves a few problems on the research and technical level. Can you be a bit more direct? Luo Nan's lips twitched. The water vapor body reflected his thoughts, and he subconsciously moved his fingers. His thumb and index finger unfolded one after the other. His middle finger was about to come out. It looked like it was going to be the third time soon. It was unknown whether or not Bai Xinyan understood Luo Nan's hand gestures. In any case, she did explain a bit more. Mr. Luo, perhaps you're paying more attention to the auction for this event organized on the Jadeite Light. But the essence of the event is actually an exhibition and an exchange meeting concerning the research and application of distortion technology. Or perhaps it's a trade fair for the results of distortion research in recent years. Among them, the controllable distortion technology is one of the most eye-catching ones. Luo Nan's fingers paused. Controllable distortion? That's right. It's using the dangerous external stimulation of distortion infection to find one or even several subversive human evolutionary paths. To put it simply, through this experiment, a new path can be opened between ordinary people and ability users. It's independent of the two existing paths of self-awakening and burner transformation. Bai Xinyan spoke with fervor and assurance. She spoke of everything she knew without holding back. She spoke without reserve. Admittedly, she spoke in a straightforward manner, but her contents possessed a shocking power. In the end, Luo Nan still extended his middle finger. His 3 fingers remained there, but his meaning had already changed completely. A third path. At least that's what the presentation said. It's the product of multiple technological collaborations. LCRF, Tianxi, Deep Blue, and a few private laboratories have all joined in. They've all achieved certain results. And Dr. Clay, my mentor, presides over the laboratory. He's the demonstrator of this technological achievement. The goal of doing this is to explore its value a step further. Right now is the time to expand its influence within a certain range and find even more supporters. Luo Nan raised his eyebrows, and at this moment, a communication wave activated the wristband of Gear's underground laboratory far away on the North Bank. This call was within his expectations, but Luo Nan was surprised when he noticed the caller. Hello, Student Yu Qin? Mr. Luo, Yu Qin's enunciation was as clear as before, but compared to a few minutes ago, the speed of her speech was clearly faster. Her choice of words was less particular, and her final words were a bit shaky. Mr. Luo, I can't contact my father. There's also Yu Zheng. There's also Uncle Lu. There's also Secretary Zheng. They aren't picking up the phone. Chapter 1052. Yu Zheng sat ramrod straight. He was even more upright than he was in class. It wasn't that he wanted to sit like this, but the metal ring on his neck was constantly releasing a weak electric current that paralyzed the central nervous system. It made him unable to muster the slightest bit of strength from head to toe. He was in whatever position the others were in. He felt more like a patient with high paraplegia who was placed in a wheelchair with the other 2 members of Team C. He was controlled by the men in black suits behind and beside him as they walked through the long corridor and entered this unfamiliar room. Then he saw the people in groups A and B and saw that they were similarly paralyzed. He also saw the catheters extending from their bodies and the blood flowing through them. A whining sound rang in his ears. It came from the 2 fellow sufferers, and perhaps also from himself. The situation didn't change according to Yu Zheng's will. The guys in groups A and B before him were treated a bit better than them. At least they had sofas and carpeted floor to lie on. They could only sit in wheelchairs and lean against the wall, shoulder to shoulder. Their hands and feet trembled as they waited for misfortune to descend. Yuzheng didn't know what was going on at all. In the beginning, he didn't know who had ordered these expressionless men in black suits to suddenly attack them, knock down old Lu, take away their communication equipment, and bring him here alone. Now that he entered this suite, he saw the floating mass of flesh that seemed to be slightly wriggling. He also saw the catheters, blood donors, and equipment. He also saw the middle-aged white man who was half lying on the bed and receiving a blood transfusion. He had an answer to the previous series of questions, but he still didn't know where this guy came from. It was an extremely terrible situation. There was a serious information imbalance. Yuzheng's thoughts could only move towards endless imagination. In the past few minutes, he had considered at least a dozen possibilities that could be used as suspense or horror. But in the end, everything turned into a meaningless, turbid current of emotions. They wantonly squeezed his heart, stirred his brain, and turned his entire body into a continuously heated pressure cooker. His eyeballs were almost squeezed out of their sockets. Yu Zheng struggled with all his might, but the electric ring on his neck just happened to control him. It reduced his efforts time and time again, intensifying his despair. Finally, after a powerful wave of emotions overflowed, Yu Zheng's state inevitably fell into a trough. His mind was in a trance, and his expression was blank. He looked at the black suits and some medical staff bustling around the room, adjusting the catheters and adjusting the instruments. He did not know how to react. Finally, there was only one thought in his mind. How did he end up in this situation? He vaguely remembered that just 10 minutes ago, as a human experimental subject who could be lying on the operating table at any time, he was a little nervous about facing the unknown, but he was not as anxious as his father. In fact, he was even a little eager. Thinking further, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was full of ambition. In his opinion, being a lab rat was nothing. All he needed was the ability to bite open the cage. That's what he said, that's what he really thought. But in the current situation, was there something wrong? The script of his life shouldn't be like this. What did I go astray? Yu Zheng's mental state was no longer able to support continuous thought. Very quickly, a few beautiful faces of the opposite sex that he had an intimate relationship with and had participated in many sports with flashed through his mind. It was during that event that he became a mutated, infected person. No, that's not right. Yu Zheng's thoughts flickered once more, and the face of a beautiful woman appeared faintly in his mind. She seemed to be called, what was her name again? He really couldn't remember, but the appearance of another male youth that appeared soon after became exceptionally deep and clear. Luo Nan. Right, it was because of that beautiful woman that he and Luo Nan became enemies. Things became awkward from then on. Even though he was infected later on, it was to a large extent because he entered the circle of unfriendly people with Luo Nan. During this period, more and more information about Luo Nan came to his family. Though Yu Qin and his father intentionally hid it from him, did they really think he was stupid? Even if he was really stupid, a few things were strung together after he came into contact with Clay's laboratory. Yu Zheng had to admit that he was very irritated when he heard the name Luo Nan. He really hated it, but there were a few other elements that were closer to the category of envy, jealousy, and hatred. Yu Qin often bragged to his father behind his back about how amazing this kid was and what abilities he possessed. Later on, he came into contact with Clay's laboratory and heard about the corresponding group. But basically, most of it was just hearsay. At the very least, Yu Zheng didn't feel it too much. After all, he had only fought with Luo Nan once in a virtual game. What he saw and heard afterward were all about Luo Nan's powerful connections and his inexplicable high social status. Through his deliberate understanding and partial imagination, the relevant concepts could only be manifested in a way that he could understand. Look, that kid who hasn't even shed his fetal hair has a so-called supernatural ability. Beauties immediately fall in love with him. He can call the wind and summon the rain, and he can act unscrupulously. If only I could do this, this was the greatest driving force that pushed Yu Zheng to participate in this experiment. But how did things turn out like this today? If Luo Nan can do it, Why can't I do it? How'd he do it? What should I do? His chaotic thoughts set off a turbulent flow of emotions once again. Under the effect of the large amounts of hormones secreted by the human body, Yu Zheng's heartbeat grew faster and faster. He unconsciously began to take large breaths, and his vision grew blurry. It was as if that petite and tender youth was standing in front of him. He just stood there without any expression, but that spot clearly sparkled with light. On the other hand, Yu Zheng's side was a sheet of darkness. The boundary between light and darkness wasn't clear. It was as if he could touch it just by extending his hand and stretching his neck. Yu Zheng subconsciously wanted to do this. He believed that he had done it because there was a change in his body, but in reality, someone had pinched his chin and moved it back and forth a few times. Yu Zheng did his best to open his eyes wide, but his severely limited control over his body made it so that he could only see the black suit in front of him. He couldn't even see the person's face clearly. Instructor Wang, the state of C2 is unstable. Is that so? Then let's put it aside for now. A knock came from the door before Instructor Wang could answer. The room was quiet, and Yu Zheng's thoughts began to return to normal. Perhaps he was stimulated by the words, "put it aside for now." He subconsciously received and analyzed the information from the outside world, and he heard Instructor Wang say, "Please come in." The voice wasn't loud, but it felt like it couldn't leave the bedroom. But the door to the outer room opened in the next moment. Someone walked in after the sound of messy footsteps. Instructor Wang called out to them. "Mr. Tuesday," another voice came from behind Instructor Wang. It was probably the main character on the bed. His tone was quite polite. "Mr. Tu, you've worked hard to make a trip here. Yes, I saw that this colleague's condition isn't too good. Send him back." This matter was clearly not important. Mr. Tu spoke a few sentences and changed the topic. "But this one, is he about to awaken?" Another person answered. "C2 was infected on New Year's Eve last year. It's a body fluid infection, and the infection duration is the longest. The laboratory has always been under good control, but since it's Group C, it might not be as stable as Group A and Group B. HM, awaken?" Instructor Wang's voice sounded again. 3 transformations or awakening. Are they talking about me? Awakening? Yu Zheng listened, not really understanding. But the rapid heartbeat and the burning sensation of his body slowly faded. The phantom of Luo Nen was no longer in front of him. Next, he went through a messy round of tests and judgments. It wasn't easy for him to slow down, but he heard Mr. Tu's slightly raised tone. Stopped. Just as he finished speaking, there was another knock on the door. Chapter 1053. At the door of the suite, Tucker's calves were twitching as he looked at the still closed door. The thick wooden door could not block out the 2 cold and tyrannical auras in the room. He could be considered a strong person in the physical body, but there was still a qualitative difference between him and the 2 in the room. After all, that was an extraordinary. Tucker's brain was quite useful, but he could not understand it all. How did Luo Nen find this place? Was he really helping a classmate? Please, this reason. Tucker was speechless. On the other side, Bai Xinyan looked calm. Perhaps it was because she had been in charge of contacting the relevant parties and trying to communicate with them first. So, she had no time to be nervous? Bullsh asterisk T. Tucker would rather take over her task. After all, it was destined to be useless. Moreover, he could take the opportunity to spread some news. It was not that Tucker did not have such an opportunity on his way here, but he did not have the guts to do so. Luo Nan, who had been flipping through the notebook all along the way, inexplicably gave him an enormous pressure. It was as if there was an incorporeal demonic eye that could see through his internal organs, his mind, and his thoughts. Perhaps Luo Nan was even devising a plan to kill him. Even if it was a misconception, Tucker didn't have the guts to test it with his own life. He had been letting his imagination run wild for quite a while. It had been at least 10 seconds since he had knocked on the door, but there was no response from the other side. This was normal. He could sense the situation behind the door, so naturally, the other side would not ignore the abnormalities outside. Maintaining silence was already a kind of attitude. Tucker hoped that things would end here. He hoped that everyone would have a tacit understanding to give each other some face and never cross the door in front of him. The problem was that the development of the situation was destined to not go as he wished. Luo Nan flipped to the last page of the notebook in his hands once more. Then he closed the notebook and let out a light breath. He spoke very calmly. Maybe he didn't hear it. Knock again. Tucker felt his scalp tingle as he listened. His heart was filled with unwillingness, but his arm was completely out of his control. He obediently reached out and pressed the doorbell. There was still no response from the other side of the door. It was also at this time that Tucker saw Luo Nan reach out his hand to the side. Of course, Luo Nan wasn't knocking on the door. Instead, he made a casual grabbing motion. A cloud of mist seemed to splash into the air. A pitch-black suitcase was pulled out from the mist by Luo Nan. Give me a hand. Tucker's brain still wasn't working. He just followed Luo Nan's instructions. He stupidly reached out his hand and used it as a platform, allowing Luo Nan to place the suitcase in his hand. The chest was opened by Luo Nan. Tucker did not know what was inside, nor did he dare to look in detail. She just watched as Luo Nan placed the notebook inside and took out a pen-like object from the center. There was also a square-cut piece of cloth and the like. Soon, the box was closed. In the very next second, Tucker's palm was moist, almost as though a stream of water was running through his palm. It was incredibly refreshing, and most importantly, the box sank right into his palm, vanishing without a trace. Magic? Spells? Tucker was a knowledgeable person, so he wouldn't make a big fuss over nothing. But the problem was that he could clearly feel that from the beginning to the end, the vital energy in his body was smooth and without any ripples, and it didn't cause any disturbance. Moreover, this wasn't under his control. It was Luo Nan. It was this young man before his eyes. Luo Nan had groomed him in a refreshing manner. There was no need for Luo Nan to use his spells. Tucker's palm was damp. There was no doubt that he was a tool through and through in Luo Nan's hands. As for how Luo Nan did it, Tucker no longer had the courage to think deeply about it. Open the door. Luo Nan's command had completely replaced Tucker's thoughts. He simply didn't think too much about it. He just opened the locked door without much effort. Luo Nan didn't pass on this responsibility. He walked straight in. Tucker's mind was still in a blank state as he followed behind Luo Nan. Bai Xinyan was at the very back. Just as they entered the door, a series of metallic mechanical sounds rang out in front of them. All the men in black suits in the living room had pulled out their guns. They aimed uniformly at Tucker. They were clearly in a state of waiting to fire. There was even a person in the middle who yelled loudly, "This is a private room. Get out immediately." Tucker's mind finally cleared up a bit under the focus of the lethal weapons. But he didn't care about these words. The matter was clear. Given the nature of these people, if a different group of people were to come in this way, no, they might not even be able to come in before they would be turned into a beehive by the bullets that shot through the door. It was precisely because of these words that the other party knew of the special nature of this place. Knowing is fear, and fear is understanding. It's true that everyone here is a tool. The group of men in black suits had sunglasses covering their faces, but it couldn't hide the beads of sweat that slid down their foreheads. Their heavy breathing exposed their unease and fear early on. Luo Nan didn't pay attention to this. It was as if he didn't see the pitch-black muzzles in front of him. He looked around very naturally. Mr. Blackline was here just now, right? He returned the notebook that my family had left outside to its rightful owner. That's why he came to express his thanks. This lousy reason. No one answered him. Luo Nan's gaze quickly locked onto the man in the worst condition among the group of men in black suits. It was tool number 1, who had returned from a mission of returning the notebook. Luo Nan nodded and answered his own question. It looks like this is the right place. Luo Nan didn't stop as he spoke. He walked straight into the bedroom. This was too much. The men in black suits, who had gone through strict training, instinctively wanted to pull the trigger, but a concise command came from inside at this time. Withdraw. It was as if the men in black suits had been pardoned. They withdrew their guns one after another, but they still blocked Luo Nan's path forward. The problem was, what was the point of that? Luo Nan had made up his mind long ago. He completely ignored the obstacles in front of him. Actually, this couldn't be considered an obstacle for his water vapor body. His footsteps didn't stop. He went straight forward and made contact with the wall of men in black suits in the blink of an eye. The latter didn't have any effect in blocking Luo Nan. Luo Nan's water vapor body was illusory. It was as if it came from another world. The two sides didn't intersect. It just passed right through. Halt! The man who had just given the order spoke once more. What was faster than his voice was the air that suddenly solidified like an iron wall. At this moment, the flow of air in the living room of the suite seemed to have completely frozen. Everyone's breath didn't even pass through their noses and mouths. Even Tucker, who had a fleshly body, felt his skin tighten. The breath of his entire body suddenly turned muddy, and the flow of his blood and energy wasn't smooth. He subconsciously took a step back and took a defensive stance. He nearly bumped into Bai Xinyan. When he looked forward again, he saw the two men in black suits blocking the bedroom door. They were like a door that had been forcefully opened. An indescribably strange sound separated them. Their bodies were stiff, and they lost all consciousness. Luo Nan, who had just passed through with his illusory water vapor body, appeared in a position near the back of the center of the door. His fake body was clearly sluggish, and there seemed to be faint wisps of water vapor emitting from it. In the next moment, his entire body distorted and collapsed. Behind him was a young man dressed like a bodyguard in a black suit, but his skin was a bit strange and gray. Instructor, Wang Yong. Tucker called out instinctively, but Wang Yong ignored him. Instead, he turned his head. At the same time, Luo Nan's calm voice came from inside the bedroom. As expected, Mr. Tu is also here. Actually, I forgot to say something just now. You don't mind taking up a bit of your time, right? Oh, this scene is truly extravagant.